Chapter 993. As the commander-in-chief of the giant whale fleet, Kudo Jun had spent most of his life on the sea. He was good at wisdom, especially at sea battles. In the changeable and complex ocean environment, he could quickly find and create opportunities. Once, in the internal sea maneuver of East Island, he had created a classic record of severely damaging 3 enemy fleets with the power of 1 fleet. That record had been nearly 10 years ago, and it was still being analyzed and simulated as a teaching material in the military academies of East Island. Kudo Jun was a real expert in sea battles and the top commander. That was why he could become the commander of the giant whale and the giant whale fleet. He had encountered all kinds of situations on the sea, and for today's decisive battle in Beihai, he had made a lot of preparations in advance. In the half a year before the fleet was activated, he had imagined all kinds of scenarios and discussed the solutions in detail with his subordinates. One after another, the so-called hopeless situations that his subordinates thought were impossible were brought up by him, and then slowly found a solution. It was no exaggeration to say that all of Kudo Jun's work in the past 6 months was for today. The senior officials of the giant whale fleet had analyzed how to enter Beihai with irresistible force under the huge advantage, take over half of Beihai, and achieve the expected combat goal. They had different solutions under different advantageous situations. Similarly, the senior officials of the giant whale fleet had also analyzed countless situations that were not in their favor. For example, the Wang family of Beihai had a sea power that had not been exposed yet, or the sea power of Zhongzhou state suddenly intervened in the battle, or something else. There was no such thing as a conventional situation in a battle. Anything that happened could be considered a special situation. And Miyamoto Jun had a way to deal with every special situation. But he had never thought that the current situation would be so special. It was so special that as the commander-in-chief of the giant whale fleet, he had directly and completely lost his command. His giant whale used to be his weapon in the sea, but now it had become his prison. When analyzing countless possible situations in the most extreme case, Miyamoto Jun had imagined that the loyal soldiers and even the senior officials of the giant whale would betray him. Even so, he could still take back the command. But now, they didn't betray him. What if the ship betrayed him? This was completely impossible, but it happened right now. Miyamoto Jun didn't know what was going on. He didn't know who was in control of the fleet, and he didn't even know where he was. The 3 fleets shifted their direction on the surface of the sea, retracted their weapons, and quickly left the designated battlefield. Miyamoto Jun's face turned red from extreme anger as he roared, "Fix the communication system immediately. I want to talk to the Senate." Yes, we are doing our best, but it will take some time. A large number of technicians were scattered throughout the giant whale, trying to regain control of the ship. The technical supervisor was typing furiously on the computer in the main control room, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. Miyamoto Jun's expression changed. He gritted his teeth and rushed out of the main control room with his phone. The entire North Sea had become a huge battlefield. Intense battles erupted in every city other than the Xingzhou region. The attack that the Allied forces had been preparing for a long time now carried with it an explosive power. For a short period of time, they were completely unstoppable. The North Sea Legion's encampment, the 7 major sword-bearing families, the city hall, all the important places were attacked at almost the same time. Close combat, entanglement, resistance, counterattack. The elites of the North Sea and the Allied forces were engaged in a frenzied battle. It seemed that no one would be able to win this battle in a short time. No wonder it's North Sea. Jiang Shangyu, who had arrived in Kanglan City 10 minutes ago, sat quietly on the sofa and looked at the screen in front of him. He praised with a gentle smile. In this situation, they still have this level of combat capability. It's not hard to imagine what will happen to us after we push the front line to the Xingzhou region. The images on the huge screen kept changing. The specific images of various cities and local battlefields kept flashing on the huge screen. So far, the Wang family of Beihai has dispatched 10 experts above the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but they haven't encountered the devil troop yet. Half an hour ago, a 50-man all-heavens troop appeared in Queen City. More aid reported calmly, summarizing the news that was constantly coming from all directions. As experts of the invincible realm, as the high-end combat capability of the Allied forces, they couldn't waste their energy to fight with the conventional forces of North Sea. Countless forces gathered in North Sea. Now they could mobilize more than 30,000 people. 30,000 elites. This number might not be comparable to the North Sea Corps, but the main force of the North Sea Corps was also restrained by East Island. The only thing the 30,000 people scattered around North Sea needed to do at this time was to try their best to kill the conventional forces of North Sea and force Mount Dibbing to keep using its trump card. The Internal Security Force, All Heaven's Troop, the Devil Troop, and so on. When the Wang family of Beihai's trump card was almost exhausted, it would be the time for several Invincible Realm experts to climb Mount Dibbing to fight it out. Not enough. Jiang Shangyu said calmly, "Wait a little longer." He took the remote control and controlled the switching frequency of the screen. The huge screen was instantly completely occupied by the fire and explosions all over the sky. In the earth-shattering firepower, an almost completely illusory figure struggled to walk through the gunfire all over the sky, looking extremely embarrassed. Everyone was staring at this scene. Li Tianlan, Jiang Shangyu could be said to be the strongest combat capability on their side. Li Tianlan, who had defeated Jiang Shangyu not long ago, had undoubtedly become a key figure who could affect the balance and even the outcome in their eyes. "Can you contact the giant whale fleet?" Jiang Shangyu suddenly said. Tianhai Wuji, the Grandmaster of East Island who had been silent most of the time, nodded. He looked at Jiang Shangyu and asked, "What's your request?" "Giant whale, black dragon, savage bird. The firepower of these three fleets on other areas can be reduced a little." Jiang Shangyu pointed at the figure on the screen who was embarrassed but not dangerous in the gunfire. "At all costs, it's best to seriously injure him. All the firepower of the three fleets can be concentrated on him." Tianhai Wuji was stunned for a moment. He took a deep look at Jiang Shangyu, nodded, and dialed the number. The phone was quickly connected. A small screen appeared on the huge screen. The figure of Miyamoto Jun, the commander-in-chief of the giant whale, appeared in front of everyone. This middle-aged man from East Island with a serious expression didn't look at the other Invincible Realm experts at all. He just saluted Tianhai Wuji and said, "Your Highness." "How far is Li Tianlan from Qiushui City?" "About 20 kilometers. Miyamoto Jun replied, "We can still carry out 2 rounds of firepower coverage in this time." "Adjust the plan." Tianhai Wuji said in a deep voice, "Your 3 fleets don't have to care about other battlefields. All the firepower is concentrated on Li Tianlan. You must make his injury worse." Miyamoto Jun nodded and hung up the communication. Tianhai Wuji said. Jiang Shangyu nodded. He looked at Qiushui City on the screen, watched Li Tianlan walk through the gunfire, and couldn't help laughing. On the screen, Qiushui City was full of gunfire. But in reality, Qiushui City was quiet. Sporadic battles broke out in all directions of the city. When the battlefield in Qiushui City was about to end, Li Tianlan finally came to Lingtai Mountain. Chapter 994. I hope you understand and keep in mind that Beihai belongs to the sea area of Zhongzhou State. Your warship entered the sea area of Zhongzhou State rashly and even used weapons. Zhongzhou State needs a clear explanation. Do you want a war? On the screen, the dignified and solemn middle-aged man's somewhat intense voice rang out clearly in the conference room. Everyone felt a heavy pressure. Matsumoto Ichiro looked at the face on the screen quietly and kept silent for a long time. He was the military spokesman of East Island. They were now in the highest-level war conference room of East Island. In the spacious conference room, the 4 walls were completely covered with screens, and all kinds of scanning, detection, communication, and control systems were there. At this moment, in the sight of the people in the war room, East Island's satellite status was normal. On the screen, in the ongoing final battle in Beihai, all the forces of East Island were moving toward the predetermined location in an orderly manner. The 3 fleets of Giant Whale, Black Dragon, and Vicious Bird were bombarding Li Tianlan on the surface of Beihai. The other 2 fleets, codenamed Sailor and White Shark, joined Jifeng Sword Raining School and were trying to approach Kanglin City from another direction. Everything was under East Island's control. All the large transport planes of East Island had gathered in different places. When the giant whale killed Li Tianlan, or forced him to retreat, Li Tianlan would not be able to escape. When the two fleets of Sailor and White Shark landed in Kanglin City. When the battle in Qiushui, Tongtian, and Kanglin City was over, countless transport planes in East Island would take off as soon as possible. An army of nearly 100,000 people would land in Beihai within 2 hours and firmly occupy Qiushui, Tongtian, and Kanglin City. The joint force would cross the Kanglin River to Shenzhou, and East Island would firmly control half of Beihai. The land that belonged to East Island hundreds of years ago was about to return. Everyone in the war room was very excited. They had long been prepared to face the pressure from Zhongzhou State, but Chen Fangqing had reached a certain degree of tacit understanding with them. When the final battle in Beihai was over, as long as they could win, Chen Fangqing could go further. At that time, Li Huaqing would step down, and Chen Fangqing would acquiesce in the northern part of Beihai province occupied by East Island and completely control the southern part of Beihai at the cost of it. So at this time, facing the questioning from the other side of the screen, Matsumoto Ichiro didn't panic. But when he saw the face of the middle-aged man, his heart sank subconsciously. The East Island fleet entered the sea area of Zhongzhou State and opened fire. Zhongzhou State would definitely hold them accountable. It would be abnormal if they turned a blind eye to everything. Matsumoto Ichiro had originally thought that it would be some high-ranking officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Chen Fangqing had strong control in this aspect. Both parties would deal with each other and wrangle, and the matter would pass for the time being. But on the other side of the screen, the diplomatic spokesman of Zhongzhou State whom Matsumoto Ichiro wanted to see did appear, but he appeared behind the middle-aged man on the screen. Matsumoto Ichiro was also very familiar with the middle-aged man facing the camera. Ma Chao, the spokesman of Zhongzhou State's military. He was Dongqing Wudi's confidant. Internationally, especially in the subcontinent, many countries had a characteristic. They used to not be afraid of dealing with the government of Zhongzhou State, but they were especially afraid of Dongqing Wudi. This was especially evident in some countries bordering Zhongzhou State, such as Heng State and Annan State. And when Dongqing Wudi went further from the Border Control Corps and became the leader of Zhongzhou State, this performance was even more obvious. Because it meant that Dongqing Wudi could order not only the Border Control Corps, but also countless armies and all kinds of military services in the entire Zhongzhou State. Dongqing Wudi was known as the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State. In the face of enemies, he could never have a good temper. If you dare to mess with me, I'll *CK you, whoever I want. And the appearance of Ma Chao at this time undoubtedly represented the will of Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi might even be off the screen at this time. I don't quite understand what you mean. Matsumoto Ichiro took a deep breath and said cautiously, but I'll start an investigation right away. Investigation? Ma Chao's eyes were sharp and he asked impolitely, what are you investigating? Don't you know where your warships are now? Here's the thing. Matsumoto Ichiro smiled. About 10 days ago, we eliminated some older warships and sold them to Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School at a low price. I think I know what's going on. General, the warships you mentioned should belong to Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School. They have nothing to do with the East Island officials. I heard that Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School don't get along well with the Wang family of Beihai. It seems to be a conflict in the dark world. We can intervene, but it won't make much difference. It's not appropriate for us to intervene in such a thing. The muscle on the corner of Ma Chao's mouth twitched obviously. You said that you sold all those warships to Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School? Including the giant whale, they have nothing to do with the East Island officials? He asked in a hoarse voice. Matsumoto Ichiro nodded. All this is the personal behavior of Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School. It has nothing to do with East Island. 3 hours. Ma Chao took a deep look at Matsumoto Ichiro. I want to see your attitude in 3 hours. He said no more and hung up the phone directly. Matsumoto Ichiro looked at the dark screen and sneered. 3 hours? 3 hours was enough for their transport troops to parachute into the northern part of Beihai. Attitude? So what if I show you my attitude then? Matsumoto Ichiro turned around slowly and said calmly, "How are the fleets doing?" "Everything is normal." The answer came quickly. Matsumoto Ichiro touched the broken beard on the corner of his mouth and nodded with satisfaction. On the other side of the screen, after hanging up the phone, Machao also smiled with satisfaction. Behind him, where the camera couldn't reach, Dongqing Wudi and Li Huaqing sat face to face, looking at each other. "These silly birds." Machao laughed. "They're so silly that they're kind of cute." That is to say, Dongqing Wudi shook his head in disbelief. Until now, no one in East Island has found out that the giant whale and the other 2 fleets have actually left the battlefield and started to approach Zhongzhou State? Obviously, they don't know anything. Ma Chao nodded with a smile. In the picture they're seeing now, the giant whale should still be attacking His Majesty. Emperor Dong's palace has edited the video of the giant whale suppressing His Majesty countless times and played it to them in different speeds. Even the communication between the 2 sides is completely simulated by Emperor Dong's palace. In this case, East Island, the giant whale, and the Allied forces are completely out of touch. They're like blind people. They'll receive whatever message we want to send them. As for whether it's true or not, they won't doubt it at all. East Island has just made it clear that giant whale, black dragon, and fierce bird have nothing to do with them. They said they sold these eliminated things to Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School at a low price. In this case, we don't need to be polite. 3 hours is enough for us to take over this batch of trophies. Even if East Island finds something by then, it'll be meaningless. I just caught a cold and then I caught a cold again. I feel terrible. I'll write less these days, and more in a few days. Chapter 995. The helicopter flew past in the night, and the intermittent humming echoed in the cabin. Xianyuan Wushang was studying the pieces of data that only he could see on the lenses of his glasses, and his other hand was still holding his big bottle of purified water. He looked so bored that he was like a salted fish that had lost all his dreams. La 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 la, gulp. The moment he stopped humming, he picked up the big bottle of purified water in his hand, raised his head, and gulped it down. The bottle of purified water, which he had drunk from Tianan to East Island, gradually bottomed out with a gulp. Xianyuan Wushang sighed, shook the empty bottle, and said gloomily, "Water is the source of life. How can we do without water?" Xing Tian's huge body sat in another corner of the cabin, listening to his young master's sigh. He rummaged in his backpack, found another bottle of water, and handed it to Xianyuan Wushang with both hands. "Oh, another bottle?" Xianyuan Wushang's eyes lit up. He took the water bottle, unscrewed it, and tapped his glasses with the other hand. A lot of data on the lenses combined and became a new virtual intelligence. The intelligence connected the communication in East Island. Xianyuan Wushang listened to the communication, shook his head, and drank some water. La 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 la, young master. Xing Tian's thunderous voice suddenly rang out. Ah! Xianyuan Wushang looked at him blankly. Are we going to participate in the final battle in Beihai? Xing Tian asked in a low voice. I'm a doctor and you're a big fool. How can we participate in this kind of thing? Xianyuan Wushang looked at him strangely. No. I just want to give my big brother a gift. It just so happens that the gift that my second sister gave me can come in handy. I'll do it. As for the other things, what else do you want to do? There was no pause in the flow of data on the lens. All kinds of data combined with each other and turned into virtual intelligences, which were placed on the network nodes in East Island, which looked calm but was actually riddled with holes. Xianyuan Wushang hummed a song and watched all this with relish. The intensity of the battlefield seemed to be escalating as time went by. The internal communication frequency of East Island was getting higher and higher, and the number of virtual intelligences made up of a large amount of data was also increasing, occupying every communication signal. During the quietest time in the entire East Island, the most horrible and weird things happened. East Island, Fleet, Beihai. 3 directions, countless small battlefields, countless command rooms, countless commanders and frontline combatants. At this moment, no one noticed anything amiss. They all thought that their communications were unimpeded and that they could communicate with anyone. But from the beginning to the end, they did not communicate with anyone. Everyone was facing different artificial intelligences. Using the simplest distance as the unit of measurement, the virtual intelligences completely isolated East Island. 10 kilometers away, no one knew what their so-called own people were doing. Lang. The fat man watched all this silently. His eyes changed from relish to boredom, and then to numbness and dullness. The song he hummed was also intermittent. Young master. Xing Tian couldn't stand it anymore and called him again. The fat man answered blankly. Xing Tian hesitated again and again. He just reminded him not to participate in the final battle of Beihai was not what he wanted to do. He just wanted to find a topic to interrupt his young master's humming. This voice was really, it sounds awful. Xing Tian finally said it, and he suddenly felt refreshed. The fat man's humming suddenly stopped. He slowly turned his head and looked at Xing Tian seriously. You said my singing is awful? Do you know? Yes, I know. Xing Tian nodded quickly. You're a very famous prince of music, but in fact, those people are just flattering you. Those women just want to please you. As for those of the same sex, they also want to get close to you so that it's convenient for them to pursue your sisters. I never lie. It sounds awful. This is my truest comment. Xianyuan Wuxiang was silent for a while. He lowered his head and started to search his body, murmuring, "Where's the saber? Where's my saber?" Xing Tian took a step back in silence. Before Xianyuan Wuxiang really found the saber, he quietly shrank in the corner. I'm telling you, it's me, Xianyuan Wuxiang was rambling. In the middle of his words, the communication screen in the cabin suddenly lit up. Qin Weibai's figure appeared on the screen. She looked at Xianyuan Wuxiang and slightly raised her eyebrows. What are you doing? Nothing. We're about to arrive at our destination. I'm a little nervous. Xianyuan Wuxiang scratched his head, looking completely harmless on his chubby face. Qin Weibai didn't care and said calmly, Now tell me, what's going on? How did you get into the core database of East Island in a short time? Xianyuan Wuxiang subconsciously narrowed his eyes. I've informed Tianlan about this, and he's also very interested in it. To be honest, we welcome you to join Emperor Dong's palace. But there are some things that we have to understand. You should know that what you did today is beyond the scope of a hacker. You can easily hack into a country's core database. This kind of ability, no hacker in the dark world can do it. Qin Weibai said calmly. Sister-in-law, you're worried that I'll get into the core database of Emperor Dong's palace at any time, right? Xianyuan Wuxiang suddenly asked. Compared with Emperor Dong's palace, Zhongzhou State has more reasons to worry. Qin Weibai took a deep look at Xianyuan Wuxiang. What you did has a great impact. Zhongzhou State is now also waiting for Emperor Dong's palace to give them an explanation. After a pause, Qin Weibai continued, no matter what explanation. Xianyuan Wuxiang was silent for a while and laughed. I see. So, Qin Weibai looked at him. How on earth did you hack into the core database of East Island? It's not an invasion. Xianyuan Wuxiang shook his head. I just upgraded the core database of East Island. In a short period of time when the system is upgraded, the calculation logic of the database system will have some errors. I also took this opportunity to get the control authority of the 3 fleets. In a way, I didn't hack into the secret database of East Island, but in a way similar to deception. During the time when the database system was upgraded, I got the control authority and fused the fake data with the secret database. In this case, in a short period of time, before the database system of East Island is completely upgraded, the data I control means that I have the highest authority in East Island. Qin Weibai was speechless. She didn't understand what Xianyuan Wuxiang was talking about. But she understood the last sentence. Before the system of East Island was upgraded, Xianyuan Wuxiang had the highest authority in East Island. Not only the 3 fleets, Not only the communication network, but all the authority. Qin Weibai took a deep breath and said softly, "The operation of Nightmare Core in East Island?" "Sister-in-law, don't worry. I'll cooperate." Xianyuan Wushang nodded honestly, his smile extremely simple and honest. "Emperor Dong's palace will explain this to Zhongzhou State, but the intrusion technology, it's not my technology." Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. "I'm a doctor. As for the virtual intrusion, it's this thing." He reached out his hand and pointed at the glasses on the bridge of his nose. "This is a gift from my second sister. Although it looks like a pair of glasses, there's a microchip inside, and there's a small program written by her. I don't understand it very well, but if I understand it, I can regard it as a one-time consumable. This time, it's almost used up, and I won't be able to use it in the future. So I'll completely become a mediocre hacker and the top doctor." He sighed softly, and his chubby face looked a little helpless. "You mean, the glasses are equivalent to a computer? Even a mainframe computer?" Qin Weibai was a little curious. "That's right. But only I can start it, and it needs authority." After a pause, he smiled. It was a very complicated smile, with self-mockery, yearning, and something else. "In this world, what doesn't need authority?" Qin Weibai glanced at him thoughtfully. "Is it a doctor, and your second sister is a hacker?" "Yes, a hacker." Xianyuan Wushang's tone was a little awkward. "How many siblings do you have?" At this moment, Qin Weibai felt like she was a household checker. But the fat man in front of her was obviously not simple, and he seemed unwilling to say anything, so she could only dig bit by bit. "A lot." Xianyuan Wushang was a little helpless. "My father is, so... Anyway, I have a lot of siblings. Are they all like you?" Qin Weibai's eyes were a little strange. "Not the same." Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. "I should be regarded as an anomaly. Most of my family are relatively serious. I mean in terms of character. Well, they're very serious, very serious. Are they all doctors or hackers? Their families are very interesting." Qin Weibai smiled. "I'm a doctor, and my second sister is a hacker. I have a few brothers. They are all martial artists, very powerful ones." "How powerful?" Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes slightly. No one noticed that her eyes were getting deeper and deeper. Xianyuan Wushang hesitated. "How does the most powerful brother compare with Tianlun?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked. Xianyuan Wushang was stunned. Xianxia raised his head subconsciously and looked at Qin Weibai. The look in his eyes was a little strange. "Compared with brother Tianlun," Xianyuan Wushang murmured to himself. He suddenly covered his face and closed his eyes. "My brothers," he covered his face and said vaguely, "they can't compare with brother Tianlun. No, they're far behind, far behind." Chapter 996. As the headquarters of the Huangfu family, one of the 7 major sword-holding families, at the beginning of the final battle, Lingtai Mountain could be said to be the most intense place in Qiushui City. As early as half a year ago or even earlier, the important figures of the major sword-holding families had left Beihai under Wang Xingxiao's tough order. The so-called important figures referred to the young people who could maintain business, connections, intelligence, and control the family order, as well as the promising young people who hadn't realized their potential yet. Most of the important combat forces of the sword-holding family stayed. This couldn't be considered a rule, but it could be considered a tradition. In hundreds of years of history, the Wang family of Beihai had never preserved its strength in force. It was the case in Mount Dibing and the sword-holding families. The core combat forces they cultivated were used for fighting. It was a worthy death, an honor, and also their own responsibility and belief. So when nearly 1,000 elites from Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace went directly to Lingtai Mountain, they encountered the fiercest and most resolute counterattack of the Huangfu family. The battle spread from the top of the mountain to the foot. Blood flowed like a river. When the distant sky was covered by endless artillery fire, the sky above Lingtai Mountain was completely covered by countless flickering blue electric arcs. The fierce battle that lasted for several hours had come to an end. There were still sounds of fighting in some corners of Lingtai Mountain. Li Tianlan stood at the foot of the burning Lingtai Mountain, looking at the mountain in front of him that used to be known as the mountain with the most spiritual qi in southern Beihai, and remained silent. In just a few hours, Lingtai Mountain had become a ruined scene. The fire that had been burning until now had burned the once lush forest into ashes. Corpses were scattered on the mountain, including those of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, as well as those of the Huangfu clan. In the fierce battle, electric arcs and thunderbolts erupted from the power of the thunder-shocking realm crisscrossed on the mountain. The extremely smooth road was twisted and broken, full of potholes. The exquisitely shaped stone forest was in ruins. Flowers, dead leaves, and blood were stuck together and everywhere. Li Tianlan came here 2 years ago. In his memory, the scenery of Lingtai Mountain was beautiful. But at this time, Lingtai Mountain was completely destroyed in just a few hours of fighting. It was a mess and looked extremely ugly. Li Tianlan breathed softly. His figure kept flashing at the foot of the mountain, all the way forward. There were obviously more elites of East Island on the mountainside. The battle up and down the mountain was almost over. The elites of the Huangfu family began to break out of the encirclement. East Island sent some people to hunt them down from the foot of the mountain all the way to the downtown. Most of the elites occupied the peak of the Lingtai Mountain and began to dig and search in teams, trying to find some hidden spots of the Huangfu clan. Although the important figures of the Huangfu family weren't here and most of the important things had been moved, there were still some things that couldn't be taken away by a family that had existed for hundreds of years. When Li Tianlan crossed the mountainside and came to the top of the mountain, the elites of East Island had just blown up a secret laboratory belonging to the Huangfu family on Lingtai Mountain. A large number of elites rushed in at the same time. One piece of equipment after another was moved out and gathered together. The carpet-style search continued. Everything that could be taken away was arranged in a large open space. As for the things that couldn't be taken away or that were of little value, such as houses, they were all blown up and furniture was all burned. Occasionally, there were seriously wounded people of the Huangfu family who were dying on the battlefield. Without any hesitation, the elites of East Island went up and killed them all. Li Tianlan's eyes grew colder and colder. He really didn't like Beihai. But the scene in front of him reminded him all the time that this was the territory of Zhongzhou State and these people in front of him all belonged to East Island. The anger and coldness in the bottom of his heart stirred his emotions little by little. Just because this was the territory of Zhongzhou State. And Li Tianlan had always regarded Zhongzhou State as his own Zhongzhou State. It could be called patriotism or pure possessiveness. No matter what the reason was, when Li Tianlan saw this scene, he would always recall a history that he didn't experience but was firmly recorded in the books. Burn, kill and rob. Zhongzhou State was the most powerful country in the world today. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, who could believe that someone could do such a thing in the territory of Zhongzhou State? Li Tianlan walked slowly with no expression on his face. The fire was still burning all over the mountains and plains. The fire distorted the light. His figure was illusory like a shadow that didn't exist, so he didn't attract anyone's attention. The elites of East Island were still busy. Li Tianlan said nothing and went straight to the direction of the Huangfu family's ancestral hall. All the spirit tablets in the ancestral hall had been moved in advance. A middle-aged man with a mustache squinted his eyes and stood in the center of the ancestral hall, quietly looking at the long sword inserted in the ancestral hall. "This is the biggest gain of our trip." Muttering to himself, he looked at the long sword in front of him with some fanaticism in his eyes, and suddenly said, "When can our equipment be sent here?" "Soon, young master. I've talked to Kojima on the phone a few minutes ago. They will arrive at Lingtai Mountain in about 20 minutes. A skinny middle-aged woman took a step forward and said respectfully, 20 minutes. The middle-aged man hesitated and nodded. Confirm Li Tianlan's current situation. I just talked to the ferocious bird fleet on the phone a minute ago. They are trying their best to suppress Li Tianlan. He is likely to be seriously injured. He can't be here within an hour. The woman's voice was flat. Very good. The middle-aged man laughed. He touched the mustache around his lips and said softly, "If Uncle can get Tianguang's sword, he can definitely enter the peak of the invincible realm faster. In today's dark world, there is no one at the peak of the invincible realm. If Uncle can go further, our Jifeng sword reigning school can definitely become one of the strongest superpowers in the whole dark world." He stared at the sword in front of him. "I will definitely bring it back to East Island. This is an important opportunity for us to rise." Yagyu Wuji. He was Yagyu Kurumi's nephew and the future heir of Jifeng sword reigning school. His martial arts level was average, but he was one of the most famous researchers in the whole East Island. This time, he personally led the team to Qiushui City, and he was determined to get the Tianguang sword that Li Tianlan inserted here 2 years ago. "So, you not only want to rob the resources of Beihai, but also my weapon?" A faintly discernible voice suddenly rang out. It was incomparably illusory, yet incomparably cold. "Who gave you the guts?" Chapter 997. The illusory voice kept echoing in the ancestral hall, and the whole hall was filled with killing intent the moment the voice sounded. Lu Wuji suddenly turned around, and his face changed dramatically. There was more than one emperor in the dark world today. Jiang Shangyu called himself His Majesty. The old man in the Holy Land whose mental strength had reached the transcendent realm was also His Majesty. But there was only one person in the whole dark world who called himself His Majesty after Wang Tianzong, Donghuang Li Tianlan. But how was it possible? The air in his sight shook and twisted slightly, and a vague, almost invisible shadow was outlined in front of the ancestral hall. When he became real from the illusory, the Tianguang sword in the ground began to tremble violently. The sharp and clear sound of the sword rushed out of the ancestral hall and almost resounded throughout the top of Lingtai Mountain. Lu Wuji's face was pale, and his eyes were full of horror and disbelief. He subconsciously reached out his finger to point at Li Tianlan, and then put his hand down instinctively. "How are you going to take away my weapon?" Li Tianlan looked at him and asked. Lu Wuji shook his head in confusion. 2 minutes ago, he had just observed the situation in the suburban base of Qiushui City through his mobile phone. Li Tianlan was struggling in the endless artillery fire, and he seemed to have been seriously injured. No one would doubt that. Li Tianlan was not the chosen one yet. Even if he really stepped into that supreme realm, what could he do? 3 large fleets, countless heavy artillery, and a dense group of aircrafts. Even if Li Tianlan was a heavenly son, he had to run away when this kind of artillery fire, which could easily destroy a large city, came over. It was not surprising that Li Tianlan was seriously injured under that level of firepower. But Li Tianlan, who was vomiting blood and struggling in the mobile phone video 2 minutes ago, now appeared intact on Lingtai Mountain. They were both in the suburbs of Qiushui City. But they were in 2 completely different directions. How was that possible? At this moment, he did not answer Li Tianlan's question. Instead, he subconsciously took out his mobile phone and quickly dialed. Li Tianlan watched all this silently and narrowed his eyes. The call was quickly connected. Lu Wuji's body trembled. When facing his own people, all the fear in his heart turned into extreme anger, which seemed to be a characteristic of this ethnic group. His eyes were red, and he roared at the top of his voice, "Report Li Tianlan's situation." Countless gunfire sounded faintly on the other end of the phone. At the same time, a calm and steady voice sounded, "Li Tianlan has been seriously injured. Everything is under control." Willow Everlasting Life's arms trembled, his face drained of all color. He was very familiar with this voice. This was the voice of Jifeng Sword Reigning School's chief guest, Tianyu. He was a chief visiting professor who was extremely loyal to the Jifeng Sword Reigning School and even a little crazy. It was impossible for him to betray the Jifeng Sword Reigning School. What did this mean? In the winter of Qiushui City, Yagyu Kurumi was so cold that he almost suffocated. This meant that at least in Tianyu's view, Li Tianlan was still under the attack of countless cannons. Then who was Li Tianlan in front of him? This could also mean that the person he was talking to wasn't Tianyu at all. He had long since lost contact with her. Then who was Tianyu on the other end of the phone? You don't want to say? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and asked again, how are you going to take this sword away? Yagyu Wuji's body suddenly shook. He wanted to show his toughness, but the sword energy everywhere in the ancestral hall was densely surrounding him, and the sharp edge almost aimed at every pore on his body. In extreme fear and suffering, his will completely collapsed in a second. East Island? No. Jifeng Sword Raining School has always had a proven theory. This theory comes from my father, Yagyu Kurumi. The so-called sword energy and the domain, as well as the destructive power of any martial arts expert, can actually be regarded as a special magnetic field. I brought a lot of equipment this time, which can interfere with or even completely suppress the magnetic field to the greatest extent, which is equivalent to suppressing Tianguang's sword energy. This is also our chance to take it away. Your Majesty, my uncle is Yagyu Kurumi, and I'm the heir of Jifeng Sword Raining School. We don't mean to take away your weapon, but my uncle hopes to observe Tianguang's sword intent and enter the peak of the invincible realm. No matter if he succeeds or fails, we will return Tianguang to its original owner and send it to Emperor Dong's palace. So, magnetic field, Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. Yes, it's the magnetic field. I can completely give the theory we studied to Emperor Dong's palace. Right now Yagyu Wuji said hurriedly. Li Tianlan had lost interest in listening to him. The dense sword energy slowly penetrated Yagyu Wuji's body and seeped in from every pore on his body. Blood spurted out, and the extremely twisted scream sounded crazily in the ancestral hall. The ubiquitous sword energy flowed slowly. Everyone in the ancestral hall was smashed into powder in the surging sword energy. Li Tianlan stood expressionlessly. Extremely dense sword qi gushed out of the ancestral hall and enveloped the entire peak of the Ling Tai mountain like water. Then, it shone brightly and the overwhelming sword qi flowed unscrupulously. The sword qi interweaved and formed a light screen. The huge light curtain completely covered Ling Tai mountain and then slowly disappeared. The world was quiet. The sound outside the ancestral hall disappeared. The sound on the top of the mountain disappeared. The sound on the mountainside disappeared. There were no corpses, not even blood. The sword energy flowed all the way, and all the East Island elites on Mount Dibing completely disappeared and evaporated. Only Li Tianlan stood in the ancestral hall alone, slowly reaching out his palm to Tianguang. The body of Tianguang's sword kept shaking, vaguely conveying a very obvious emotion of joy. Li Tianlan crooked his finger. Whoosh! Tianguang's sword suddenly rushed out of the ground and rushed to Li Tianlan. The black trench coat completely opened at this moment, covering Tianguang's sword. The trench coat danced in the air, with a harsh sound of metal rubbing. Li Tianlan slowly turned around and walked out of the ancestral hall. He scoffed at Yagyu Wuji's theory of magnetic field. It was not because Yagyu Wuji was wrong. It was just that this was nothing new in his eyes. In the past 2 years, the Wang family of Beihai had also used the device to suppress the magnetic field to pull out the divine weapon he left in Beihai, but it had not succeeded so far. Li Tianlan had inserted the divine weapons in the 13-story tower in the 7 sword-holding families and Mount Dibing in Beihai. Of course, it was not meaningless. The 7 sword-holding families and Mount Dibing could be said to be the place with the richest vitality in the whole Beihai. Mysteriously, it was the place with the richest luck. The divine weapon could not absorb the vitality, but it could speed up the energy storage in this vitality. After 2 years, Li Tianlan came to Beihai again. The divine weapons were combined into one. Xianyuan Feng, who had become complete again, was destined to be more terrifying than before because of the addition of several murderous weapons. Now, if Xianyuan Feng had enough energy, Wang Tianzong had little chance to survive another eternal sword above Mormon's. The flying black trench coat slowly quieted down. Li Tianlan pinched the cuff, felt the remaining energy of Xianyuan Feng, and narrowed his eyes. On the quiet Ling Tai mountain, his figure slowly rose into the air. The black trench coat danced in the cold wind. Li Tianlan's figure rushed directly to the north, driven by ruthlessness. The Ling Tai mountain was the starting point. A rainbow-colored sword light streaked across the sky in an instant, shooting toward the north at an incredible speed. The night was either quiet or gorgeous. The rainbow crossed the sky unscrupulously and was extremely dazzling in the night. From Qiushui to Tongtun, it passed by Kanglin, Queen City, Floating Island City, Lioli City, Shenzhou City. Under the night sky, the rainbow across the whole Beihai flew farther and farther, getting brighter and brighter. A rainbow across the whole province. It was like the most shining miracle of this era. Chapter 998. Kanglin City was filled with snow and wind. Starting from Kanglin City, all the way north to Shenzhou, more than half of the North Sea province was covered in snow. The chaos in the city had come to an end. But the slaughter continued. The entire North Sea province's communications had been paralyzed for less than an hour. Those who weren't directly involved simply couldn't imagine what had happened in this city. Kanglin was the center of Beihai. After years of reasonable development and superior geographical location, this city had become the most prosperous city in Beihai. Even in the north of Zhongzhou State, Kanglin could be said to be one of the most prosperous cities, surpassing Bin City and Qingdao. Whether in terms of environment or economy, it could be said to be second to none in the north of Zhongzhou State. The status of Huading in Zhongzhou State was basically the same as that of Kanglin in Beihai. More than a quarter of the population of North Sea was in Kanglin. Even though it was a snowy night, there were still people coming and going, and it was an endless stream. In tonight's decisive battle, this was also the city that the United Forces valued the most. The geographical location of Kanglin was excellent. It could attack and defend. It had a large population and a prosperous city. It could easily cause great chaos, cause a huge impact, and weaken the strength of Beihai. Before officially setting foot on Mount Dibing, it could be said to be the headquarters of the joint forces. All the Invincible Realm experts were here. This was also the first city to have its communications blocked. It was also the first city where the decisive battle in North Sea broke out. At the same time, it was also the most tragic battlefield. From the communication blocking to the Wang family of Beihai forcibly restoring the communication. 56 minutes. The sky was filled with snow, and the whole city was stained with blood. The Allied forces temporarily controlled Kanglin City's transportation network. Car accidents, rear-end collisions, and countless traffic accidents plunged the center of Kanglin City into a state of chaos and congestion in the shortest time possible. The policemen who were trying their best to maintain order were shot to death. Chaos continued to spread at the scene of the accident. The city government was attacked. Explosions roared in the city. The crowd was surging chaotically, trampling, pushing, and shoving. In a situation where communication was completely blocked, be it the police or the army, their reactions were extremely slow. After more than 50 minutes of preparation, the chaos in the entire city had reached a point where it was almost out of control. The idea of conserving their strength and concentrating their strength was unrealistic in such a chaotic situation. There were 3 divisions of the Beihai army stationed in Kanglin, more than 10 special warfare organizations, special police, firefighting, explosion prevention. All the forces had no choice but to evacuate the citizens and re-establish order. The celebration of the Allied forces had begun. Fresh blood bloomed in every corner of the city along with the flying snow. No one would be stupid enough to attack civilians. However, the North Sea soldiers responsible for evacuating the civilians were the targets of the Allied forces. Assassination, sneak attack, siege. Death spread everywhere. All the manpower and material resources of the joint forces in Kanglin City were mobilized. Taking advantage of the sudden decisive battle without any warning, they seized the initiative and directly tore the entire Kanglin City into a mess before the Wang family of Beihai could react. 3 hours. When Jiang Shangyu returned to Kanglin from Tianan, there were almost no pedestrians on the streets and alleys of Kanglin. Mount Dibing's martial law order covering the entire province was passed to every household in different ways. But in order to calm the chaos in Kanglin, within 3 hours, more than half of the middle and senior members of the 3 divisions of Kanglin were killed or injured. The order was completely out of control. The entire Kanglin almost completely fell into the hands of the joint forces in these 3 hours. Kanglin lost contact with Mount Dibing. They could not support Mount Dibing, and Mount Dibing could not support Kanglin. Without any hesitation, thousands of elites of the Allied forces rushed into the headquarters of the Jiang family in the center of Kanglin Lake. They pushed forward all the way, and the process was unexpectedly smooth. The Jiang family, known as loyal and brave, turned out to be the one with the least strength among all the sword-holding families. To be exact, there was almost no strength. How much strength did they have? The Allied forces did not even encounter any symbolic resistance and directly occupied the island in the center of Kanglin Lake. The control of the island changed hands. Under the guidance of Wang Xiaoyao, the Allied forces opened the monitoring system and command system of the Jiang family all over Kanglin City. All the people of the Allied forces in Kanglin City also became more efficient because of the Jiang family system, and the personnel deployment was more reasonable. Countless elites of the Allied forces were divided into countless teams under precise command, and quickly rushed to the key positions of Kanglin City one after another. In the shortest time, the entire Kanglin City seemed to have become their fortress. All the invincible realm experts of the Allied forces did not move. They did not go to the island in the center of the lake of the Jiang family. Instead, they had been in the conference room of the hotel next to Kanglin River, confirming the news from all sides through a large number of screens and complex communications. At present, we can be sure that Kanglin City is already under our control. In an hour at most, our soldiers can occupy all the strategic key positions in Kanglin City. With sufficient ammunition, food, and water, even if Mount Dibing can mobilize the Beihai Corps, we can still hold on for a long time. Jiang Shangyu looked at the picture on the screen and suddenly said. As he spoke, he looked thoughtfully at Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurumi. Wang Xiaoyao sat next to Jiang Shangyu and looked at the two grandmasters of the invincible realm from East Island with no expression. Our elites will come to Kanglin City within 4 hours. Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School have about 70,000 people, and they are all real elites. Tianhai Wuji's tone was much faster than before, and there was a touch of excitement in his eyes. Kanglin, Tongtian, and Qiushui. These three cities represented half of Beihai Province, which originally belonged to East Island hundreds of years ago. Now they occupied Kanglin City and faced the Queen City across the river. As long as Kanglin City was in their hands, they could use Kanglin City to slowly encroach on Tongtian Port and Qiushui City. These two cities were completely sandwiched between Kanglin City and East Island. Even Beihai couldn't make any big moves at that time. They couldn't take down Kanglin City in a short time, and it was impossible for their main force to bypass Kanglin City. Under the stalemate, in 10 years, 20 years, or even longer, East Island would have a chance to completely take back this land of more than 70,000 square kilometers. Tianhai Wuji glanced at Wang Xiaoyao, who was expressionless, and subconsciously turned his eyes to the screen beside him. A dazzling arc of colorful light flashed on the screen. The incomparably dazzling and resplendent seven-colored radiance was so dazzling in the snowy night sky. Tianhai Wuji's heart suddenly sank, and he subconsciously said, "What was that?" Everyone's attention was completely attracted by Tianhai Wuji. That rainbow was still hanging in the night sky on the screen, penetrating the wind and snow, extending toward the unknown distance. Jiang Shangyu's face suddenly became extremely ugly, and he was also a little shocked. Switch to the rear image. He suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice. The battle in Qiushui City was over. The Chen family in Tongtian Port was completely destroyed by Li Tianlan more than 2 years ago, and it hadn't recovered until now. Kanglin City was completely under their control. So from their point of view, Tongtian and Qiushui City behind Kanglin City were their rear. Li Tianlan might land in Qiushui City, but there were 3 fleets waiting for him. So more than 90% of the screens in the conference room were showing the battles of other cities in Beihai. Queen City, Floating Island City, Lioli City, everywhere was in the flames of war. Everyone ignored the rear until Tianhai Wuji reminded them. The screen quickly switched. In just a few seconds, all the screens turned black for a moment, and then lit up again. This time, most of the screens showed the rear image of Kanglin City. The conference room fell into a dead silence. Everyone in the conference room stood up subconsciously and stared at the screen. The colorful rainbow appeared on almost every screen. It was so bright, so dazzling. From Qiushui City to Tongtian. Just now, the rainbow flew over Kanglin City and directly entered Queen City. The dazzling rainbow extended all the way in the air, forming a long rainbow with a length of 10,000 meters and hundreds of thousands of meters. The sword energy was as majestic as the ocean, mighty and mighty. Jiang Xiangyu's figure flickered and went directly to the window. Through the French window, he squinted and looked at the night sky in front of him. The snow was falling. The bright rainbow on the screen was in the night sky above his head. The rainbow in the snowy night was like a dream. But the mighty sword intent that seemed to be able to tear the world made everyone's scalp numb. Ruthlessness alone can't do this, and it's not necessary. Jiang Xiangyu looked at the end of the night sky, looked in the direction of Mount Dibing, and said slowly, Li Tianlan is coming. Everyone held their breaths. Li Tianlan. This name now represented a real and almost suffocating pressure, which no one could ignore. But how is this possible? After an unknown amount of time, Tianhai Wuji muttered to himself. Jiang Xiangyu looked up at the largest screen in the middle of the conference room. On the screen, there was still a scene of continuous gunfire. Li Tianlan was covered with blood in the endless gunfire, struggling to move forward. Who can tell me what this thing on the screen is? Jiang Xiangyu suddenly asked. Tianhai Wuji's face was extremely pale. The giant whale, the vicious bird, and the black dragon all joined the fleet of Wuji Palace. They were also the main forces that restrained and even seriously injured Li Tianlan. If the Li Tianlan on the screen was just a shadow with the technological level of the giant whale, the Li Tianlan on the screen can't be fake. The technological level of the giant whale is enough to detect whether Li Tianlan is real or not. Li Tianlan can't hide this from the giant whale. The Li Tianlan in the video can't be. The Li Tianlan in the video can't be a problem. Jiang Xiangyu suddenly interrupted Tianhai Wuji's words, but what if the video itself is fake? Tianhai Wuji froze for a moment and said subconsciously, how is it possible? Jiang Xiangyu closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. Then he said calmly, help me contact the commander of the giant whale. Tianhai Wuji took out his mobile phone and quickly dialed. The dialing was normal. The communication was picked up almost immediately. Jiang Xiangyu said indifferently, how is Li Tianlan? The screen in the conference room flickered slightly. The figure of the commander of the giant whale appeared on one of the screens. He glanced at Jiang Xiangyu and said in a cold voice, everything is normal. Jiang Xiangyu looked at him silently for a long time. Who are you? He suddenly asked, you are not the commander of the giant whale. Tell me, who are you? The commander of the giant whale was silent for a moment. Bang! The screen suddenly exploded for a moment. Countless snowflakes flashed on the screen. The figure of the commander of the giant whale disappeared completely. Then, the screens exploded one after another. In a few seconds, all the screens in the conference room turned into snowflakes. A fat man with a blurry silhouette appeared vaguely in the flashing snowflakes on the screen. He seemed to be smiling. It was extremely blurry and hard to see. But his voice rang clearly in the conference room. I am your ancestor. Chapter 999. The entire North Sea province was welcoming that incomparably dazzling sword light. The sword light crossed the north and south ends of Beihai with Qiushui City as the 7 points, forming a rainbow in the sky with an unimaginable length. The entire Beihai was shrouded in this rainbow. Night, sea, flying snow, rainbow and lights. The rainbow that seemed to cross the endless distance landed gracefully on Mount Dibing. This was a completely unimaginable picture, with a touch of soul-stirring brilliance and shock. The entire Mount Dibing was quiet. At this moment, it was the first time in its life to see such a scene. The brilliant and dazzling light kept hitting the surface of Mount Dibing. The sword energy kept gathering in the center of Mount Dibing and turned into a storm. On the stage of Formidable Person, Wang Xianxia looked down at this scene and didn't speak for a long time. An extremely loud sword sound suddenly rang out beside Wang Xianxia. the stone of formidable person, which had stood on the stage of formidable person for hundreds of years, shook violently. In an instant, the silver moon inserted in the stone of formidable person rushed straight to the place where the light converged. The colorful light slowly spread and drowned the silver moon without any hindrance. The sword energy storm in the center of Mount Dibbing slowly stopped. A figure gradually appeared in the rainbow across the night sky. Li Tianlan slowly walked out of the light with a calm expression. Behind him, the rainbow light that filled the north and south ends of Beihai became fainter and finally disappeared. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and felt the state of ruthless. In this state, ruthless could not be regarded as a real complete body, but it had already surpassed the original complete body. With ruthless, Li Tianlan could almost feel the position of all the famous swords in the 13th floor, but he didn't feel the position of Broken Heart. More than 2 years ago, it was here that when he carefully hung Broken Heart on her chest, the famous sword and the woman seemed to completely disappear from his life. There was no Broken Heart in the 13th floor, but there were several other famous swords made of murderous weapons. If ruthless in this state was at its peak, Li Tianlan's sword with all his strength would completely surpass the eternal sword above Mormon's. Li Tianlan gently took a breath and opened his eyes. Wang Xianxia came to Li Tianlan from the stage of formidable person. The two looked at each other. Wang Xianxia nodded and slowly said, "Welcome, Your Highness." It was His Highness. Everyone in the North Sea province, from top to bottom, only had His Majesty in their hearts. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said with a faint smile, "Beihai is very lively." From the autumn waters to the Shenzhou province, he had seen countless battles along the way. Qiushui city had almost no power to fight back. Kanglin city had completely fallen. The situation in the other cities was not much better. Several superpowers and dozens of second-class forces. That night, almost the entire Dark World besieged the Wang family of Beihai. Xianyuan Wushang did control the 3 fleets of East Island, but he, who had the highest authority in East Island, didn't care about the other armed forces that joined Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School. He and Li Tianlan had never met or communicated with each other, but he clearly saw through Li Tianlan's mind, or perhaps he understood the situation of Emperor Dong's palace. From Li Tianlan's point of view, the Wang family of Beihai naturally had to be preserved, and then maintain the balance between Zhongzhou State, Beihai, and Tianan. But this so-called preservation did not necessarily mean that the Wang family of Beihai would be unscathed. In fact, it was more in the interest of Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace to keep the Wang family of Beihai, which had suffered a great loss in armed forces. Beihai would win the final battle, but it would fall into a weak state. In this way, after the final battle, Emperor Dong's palace would face an unimaginable feast. The interest of Zhongzhou State could be used to build a new group. The victory of the final battle also meant that most of the superpowers and dozens of second-class forces in the coalition would disappear, and the entire Dark World would fall into a blank period in a short time. The Wang family of Beihai, which had suffered a great loss of vitality, couldn't take care of these things, and Emperor Dong's palace could take advantage of the situation to extend its tentacles to every corner of the Dark World, further catching up with the Wang family of Beihai. Beihai had to win. Li Tianlan had to come. Under this premise, Li Tianlan naturally hoped that the process would be beneficial to him. The overall quality of the soldiers who joined Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School from East Island was not very high, but there were enough of them. These endless soldiers formed the main force against the Beihai Corps, and the elites of the coalition forces could exert their strength unscrupulously. Therefore, after the fall of Kanglin, several cities in the northern part of Beihai were not optimistic. At this time, there were also battles and battlefields of different degrees inside Shenzhou City, which was enough to explain the problem. "It's really lively." Wang Xianxia nodded. "Each of us is mentally prepared for today's scene, and some people are destined to pay the price." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. "So?" Wang Xianxia took a deep look at Li Tianlan, and then at the windbreaker he was wearing. The black windbreaker seemed to become more and more gorgeous and exquisite because it was getting more complete, and the hem was longer. Every shining golden pattern on the clothes had an extremely sharp aura. Wang Xianxia looked at it carefully for a while and laughed. No matter what happens in the future, at least now, you are the most reliable ally of Beihai. I can trust you, and the Wang family of Beihai can trust you. So as long as you are here, Mount Dibing doesn't need too many guards now. At this point, I don't mind that Beihai is more lively. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly. Wang Xianxia waved his palm in the night sky. Powerful auras burst out from every corner of Mount Dibing one after another. Li Tianlan saw a lot of acquaintances. The Enchantress, Firmament, Xia Huang, and so on were all famous thundershocking realm experts in the Wang family of Beihai. The Devil Troop that made Ruthless show some desire. The Heaven Punishment Troop. The Internal Defense Force. Countless silhouettes emerged from the dark corners. It was a sea of people. Wang Xianxia watched all this silently. His expression was calm, but his tone was a little ferocious. Tonight, everyone will pay the price. He stared into Li Tianlan's eyes and stared at them. His eyes were red, with some unwillingness, some helplessness, some jealousy, and some bitterness. All the emotions flowed in his eyes, and finally turned into relief. I'll give you the dark world you want. He smiled freely. I only want my Beihai. What you want and what I want, we can fulfill each other's wishes. Tonight. Li Tianlan nodded, reached out his hand and said faintly, happy cooperation. Two hands clasped together. The next moment, Wang Xianxiao's voice rang through Mount Dibing. Everyone go. Perhaps for the joint forces, the final battle in Beihai had begun for a while. But for the Wang family of Beihai, the real final battle had just begun. Chapter 1000. The sound of messy footsteps rushed across the street. Most of the street lamps on the side of the road had been broken, but the world was not dark. Snow was falling down quietly, covering the whole city. Faint explosions and roars could be heard faintly from afar. He moved his body with difficulty and observed the scene on the street through the gap of the door. In the distance, there was an incomparably tall figure standing quietly in the snowy sky. Bright electric arcs covered his entire body, and the faint light constantly spread around him. He carefully searched everything around him, and the sky full of electric arcs flashed again and again in the sky. His body was tense inside the crack of the door, and his eyes were sharp and firm. When the slowly spreading electric arc in the air expanded to its maximum range, it was less than 100 meters away from his current position. At a distance of dozens of meters, life and death were clear. The snow was flying all over the sky. The thundershocking realm expert in the air did not seem to gain anything. The shining electric arc around him quickly gathered around him. His figure flashed and rushed into the distance. Behind the door, he clutched his chest tightly. The coughing fit that he had been suppressing for a long time was accompanied by specks of blood that spurted out of his mouth. Captain! A hurried voice came from behind him. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. His swaying body was supported by a pair of arms behind him. How are you? Take a break. I'm fine. He shook his head hard, pulled himself together, and said reluctantly, it should be safe here for the time being. Get ready. We'll rush out and find more comrades. The situation is already very dangerous. Uncle, Dad said your injury is very serious now. You need treatment. A faint light suddenly lit up in the dark environment. A childish voice sounded behind the light. It was very light. You can't run around. Dad is preparing the medicine for your treatment. The faint candlelight swayed gently in the darkness. A little boy, who looked about 7 or 8 years old, came over. He held a candle in one hand and a roll of gauze in the other. He slowly took a step back and sat on the ground against the door, paying attention to the situation outside the crack of the door out of the corner of his eye. The little boy came closer and closer with the candle in his hand. He waved to the child, coughed and laughed. Little guy, what's your name? How old are you? My name is Lu, I'm 7 years old. The child handed him the gauze and asked softly, Uncle, what's your name? Looking at the wound on his body, the child seemed to want to touch it, but he didn't dare. He only asked weakly, Does it hurt? North Sea Legion, Heavenly Legion, 5th Division, 6th Division, Reconnaissance Company Captain Cheng Beijiang. The man touched the child's head and chuckled. Thank you, and thank your father. He took the gauze from the child's hand and removed it. With the help of several team members, he bandaged the wound and sat on the ground, gasping for breath. Lioli City, 2:40 a.m., Central Avenue. The battle was still ringing out in the distance. Cheng Beijiang listened to the explosion in the distance, and his eyes became more and more determined. The child stood in front of him and stared blankly at his face, murmuring, "Where's the trump card? You know." Cheng Beijiang chuckled in surprise. Of course. The little boy suddenly became excited. "Uncle, my dream is to become a soldier when I grow up. I want to protect and fight for North Sea. Protect North Sea, fight for North Sea." Cheng Beijiang murmured to himself. The corner of his mouth twitched fiercely, and he smiled bitterly. They were indeed one of the trump cards of the North Sea Legion. Even in the entire Zhongzhou state, the Heavenly Legion could be said to be second to none in the reconnaissance army, and the 5th Division, where he was in, was the core of the Heavenly Legion. Every regiment and company under it had its own glorious history. In terms of combat effectiveness, Cheng Beijiang was 32 years old this year. He was in the fire-flaming realm and was the captain of the company. This was enough to show the strength of the Heavenly Legion. The Heavenly Legion was one of the trump cards of the North Sea Legion. Every soldier in the army was definitely the kind of soldier who could be looked up to by others. Cheng Beijiang, who was only in charge of a small team in his own company, could not be regarded as a regular officer. He was just a sergeant, but if he were in another army, he might not be willing to be a company commander. This was the pride of the North Sea Legion and the Heavenly Legion. However, this pride was completely shattered tonight. The word failure, not only the Heavenly Legion, but also the entire North Sea Legion had never thought about it in recent decades. They were proud to think that they were the strongest army in the world, the most elite soldiers, and they despised everyone else. The more proud they were, the more humiliated they were. The sudden outbreak of a large-scale battle made the entire Heavenly Legion completely sober up in blood and death. They were originally the army stationed in Empress City, across the river from Kanglan City. But now, they appeared in Lioli City behind Empress City. This could no longer be described as a failure. It was a complete fiasco. Face to face, a fiasco without any reason. The Heavenly Legion came to Empress City from Shenzhou last year, which was enough to show that Mount Dibing had expected today's battle, so they let the trump card of the North Sea Legion come to Empress City. Wang Xiangxiao's idea was very simple. Once the decisive battle in Beihai broke out, with Chen Fangqing's interference, it would be difficult for Beihai to completely control the south of Kanglan River. In this way, Empress City in the north of Kanglan River became the top priority, and the Heavenly Legion was the most important line of defense in Empress City. In a sense, Empress City could even be said to be the front line of the decisive battle in Beihai. As long as Empress City was held, when the situation of the decisive battle was clear, Mount Dibing would send enough forces to cross the river, recapture the southern area of Beihai, and move the front line to the south. The Heavenly Legion was originally full of confidence in this task. But what they encountered was extremely humiliating and deathly pale. The fierce battle in Empress City lasted for the 3rd hour. The Heavenly Legion was completely scattered. With less than 15,000 people, they faced Jifeng Sword Raining School, more than 60,000 soldiers of Wuji Palace, and various masters of the joint forces. The commander-in-chief of the Heavenly Legion, who was born in the Chen family, died on the spot. Relying on the internal communication command system, the Heavenly Legion began to retreat. They planned to retreat to Lioli City, reorganize the soldiers, and then start to fight back. Empress City completely fell. Along the way, the Heavenly Sky Army's convoy was full of defeated soldiers. Obviously, the joint forces were not satisfied with the current result. More and more soldiers poured in from Kanglan City. After occupying Empress City, the cannon fodder of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace directly rushed out of Empress City without any hesitation and followed the Heavenly Legion to Lioli City. The Heavenly Legion's advantages in equipment and personnel quality were infinitely reduced in front of enemies several times their own. The army of Jifeng Sword Reigning School and Wuji Palace drowned the Heavenly Legion. The thunder-shocking realm masters of the joint forces were completely and scrupulously assassinating the middle and senior members of the Heavenly Legion. They were routed. They were constantly routed. They came to Lioli City, but they didn't have any time to rest. The entire Lioli City directly fell into the cruelest street fighting. Cheng Beijiang's team had 11 people, but from Empress City to Lioli City, he only had 2 comrades left. The battle in Lioli City was still going on. Cheng Beijiang gritted his teeth and suddenly stood up. Blood dyed the gauze red, and the red color kept spreading on his body. Cheng Beijiang looked at the 2 comrades beside him and said in a deep voice, "Let's kill our way out." Kill our way out? With your current injury, you're already strong-willed enough to stay awake. Do you still want to kill our way out? How can we kill them? A young man in a white coat walked over with a large pile of medicine. Cheng Beijiang gritted his teeth and said nothing. His team sneaked into this clinic by the roadside when they were being chased by a thunder-shocking realm expert of the joint forces. The doctor in the clinic was tutoring his son with his homework. Seeing the military uniforms they were wearing, he gave them a lot of medicine without saying anything. At this moment, feeling the bursts of numbness in his body, Cheng Beijiang shook his head fiercely. Because the medicine the doctor gave him not long ago was obviously anesthetic. Beihai is very dangerous tonight, isn't it? The doctor took a cup, poured out the medicine, handed it to Cheng Beijiang, and said in a low voice, "Since His Majesty left more than 2 years ago, Beihai has been very dangerous, right?" He paused and said a little blankly, "Can we still make it through?" "Of course." Cheng Beijiang hesitated for a moment, took the medicine and said calmly, "The safety of Beihai shouldn't be guarded by 1 person and 1 sword. It should be guarded by thousands of troops of the Beihai Corps." He turned his head to look out of the window and said softly, "From now on, the Beihai Corps will not retreat." The battle in the distance didn't stop. Instead, it became more and more intense. Cheng Beijiang pushed open the door of the clinic and said calmly, "There's no way out." Chapter 1001. At 3 o'clock in the morning. Beihai was getting more and more chaotic. This was a night that was destined to leave a deep mark in the history of Beihai. In the past 100 or even hundreds of years, the whole of Beihai suffered an unprecedented blow overnight and suffered heavy losses. The southern part of Beihai completely fell, and the once prosperous Queen City was in a mess. The elites of Jifeng Sword Reigning School and Wuji Palace fought fiercely with Beihai in Lioli City. There was no advance or retreat. There was no attack or defense. There was only attack and counterattack. The soldiers who had no way out seemed to become the most elite and cold-blooded warriors of sacrifice. The 2 superpowers of East Island tried their best to break through the defense line of Lioli City. The elites of Beihai fought back at all costs. No one cared about the loss. The 2 sides were fighting head-on, and no one was willing to take a step back. The sound of fighting and roaring spread throughout the city. Everyone in Beihai was fighting back with red eyes. Forward! Forward with all their strength. 14 minutes ago, Jiang Cheng, the second in command of the Heavenly Army and an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm from the Jiang family of Kenglin, died under the siege of Jifeng Sword Reigning School and Wuji Palace. Almost half of the city could see the dazzling thunder and lightning that Jiang Cheng gave out before he died. His last order resounded in the ears of every soldier of Beihai in the dazzling light. He shouted at the top of his voice, determined and crazy. That was the last military order. "Heavenly Army, go forward or die." The thunder and lightning spread wildly under the night sky. Jiang Cheng's last outburst engulfed the 2 guests of Jifeng Sword Reigning School. From that moment on, all the elites of Beihai went crazy. Everyone seemed to have lost their minds as they desperately rushed forward and killed. Go forward or die. There was no retreat, only desperate counterattack at all costs. Under the extremely decisive order, Lioli City was stained with blood almost everywhere. From the moment Jiang Cheng sacrificed his life, This dispute was doomed to have only two endings. Either the heavenly army died, and the elites of the two superpowers of East Island rushed over. Or the elites of the two superpowers of East Island were completely killed, and the crazy heavenly army counterattacked Queen City. The whole Lioli city was completely in a deadlock. In the conference room on the top floor of Kanglin Hotel, all the top officials of the joint forces had fallen into chaos. At first, it was just a discussion, but the discussion turned into a discussion, and the discussion turned into a quarrel. It seemed that the joint forces, which had the upper hand, were getting more and more chaotic. Even several invincible realm experts looked gloomy. Jiang Shangyu stood in front of the huge screen and looked at the scene on the screen. He had been silent for a long time. The big screen, which had been divided into countless scenes, was extremely lively. The screen that was originally showing the decisive battle in the North Sea was now playing an extremely comical image. To be exact, including Jiang Shangyu, all the higher-ups of the joint forces present were being taught a lesson. They were being taught some knowledge about East Island. Have you heard of Maria Ozawa? Have you heard of Shoifuku? Do you know who Yuichi Hitano is? You know that angels aren't cute, right? Does Big Xiao know about Weijio? Sans Hangyuya? Five Vine Orchid? Miki Kamitani? Misato Shimizu? Hashimoto Minoru? Love of Crete? There will always be one for you. Even if you don't know it, it doesn't matter. The chubby Mr. Xianyuan put all the wonderful works on the big screen in the conference room. One by one, he brainwashed all the invincible realm experts and the higher-ups of the joint forces in turn. The teacher's singing was beautiful and mellow. Everyone in the conference room felt dizzy and restless. The original fighting scenes were replaced one by one, and all the communications were unilaterally blocked. Jiang Shangyu turned off the big screen directly, indicating that he didn't want to learn and didn't like to learn. The blocking was turned off for nearly half an hour before it was turned on again. The big screen, which was still divided into countless scenes, finally lost the teacher's conscientious figures. But the picture that appeared in front of everyone looked even weirder. The fighting was still going on. In a short time, Jiang Shangyu saw himself being killed countless times on the screen. Some died in the hands of Tianhai Wuji in Mount Dibbing, some died in the hands of Moraid in the conference room, and some were killed by Wang Xiaoyao in front of the hotel. What was worse was that he was drowned in the toilet by Yagyu Kurasumi. Countless pictures were randomly woven. Wang Xiaoyao, Yagyu Kurasumi, Tianhai Wuji, Moraid, and everyone saw how they died on the screen. The quarrel seemed to start at that time. With the communication blocked, they were completely in the dark now. They would see whatever the fat man, who claimed to be the ancestor of the left and right people, wanted them to see. In the world of the internet, he unscrupulously weaved all kinds of pictures that had no traces of falsification. But they didn't know what the real situation was. They didn't know at all. They didn't know at all. From their position, they could feel that the firepower support from the sea had completely disappeared. Li Tianlan leaped over Kanglin City. But obviously, East Island didn't realize this. In the pictures woven by the fat man, the people of East Island might have thought that they were about to win. They had completely lost contact with all their subordinates, and there was no way to change the combat order. With Beihai as the center, such a combat radius was frighteningly large. If they had to rely on manpower to convey orders, their entire combat target would become extremely stiff. All kinds of quarrels rang in Jiang Shangyu's ears. Some people even began to consider the problem of retreat. Everyone. Jiang Shangyu suddenly opened his mouth. His voice was very light, but it swept through the whole room very clearly. The conference room suddenly became quiet for a moment. In fact, there is nothing to think about, and there is nothing to quarrel about, is there? Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and glanced at the whole room. Things are already very obvious. You said retreat, but how? Leave Beihai by yourself? Who is willing to do that? If you are willing to give up your subordinates, give up everything you invested in the final battle, and want to retreat, then I have no opinion. You can go. Or, walk all over Beihai on your own feet and bring your subordinates back one by one? Several leaders of the second-class forces who had clamored to retreat immediately looked at each other, and no one spoke. We all know that it's impossible. Jiang Xianxia said calmly, so, our only choice is to attack. We can only attack. The situation is indeed very passive now, but it's not that there is no way. At least before the final battle, everyone has given their subordinates clear enough combat goals. So even if we have lost contact with each other now, I think they should know what they are going to do. I have never doubted the execution ability of my soldiers. A tall white man stood up and said in a deep voice, I'm afraid that the fat man who controls the communication network will give them wrong orders in our name. This is indeed possible. Jiang Xianxia nodded. But it shouldn't happen until now. What's the reason? Tianhai Wuji looked at Jiang Xianxia seriously. East Island had the most elites joining Wuji Palace, and their strength was also the strongest, much stronger than Jifeng Sword Raining School. In this case, one could imagine the pressure he was under. If the fat man came from Beihai, he would indeed do this. Not to mention our elites who are fighting for their lives outside, even we have been heavily surrounded now. But none of this happened. Jiang Xianxia smiled. I don't think the fat man can't do this. I think he can do it, but he doesn't want to do it. So, the fat man probably doesn't belong to Beihai. The most likely possibility is that he is from Emperor Dong's palace. Making Beihai suffer heavy losses but still have the qualification to survive is in the interest of Emperor Dong's palace. Similarly, this is also our opportunity. The fat man won't attack us for the time being, because he is still waiting for the Wang family of Beihai to continue to lose blood. And we have indeed lost contact with our direct line of descent, but their battle plan should not be changed, because only in this way, Beihai will confront us head-on. Li Tianlan should have arrived at Mount Dibing now. The only thing Wang Xingxiao can do is to rely on Li Tianlan to protect the safety of Mount Dibing and send all the elites of Beihai to support Beihai. So, if I'm not wrong, the defense of Mount Dibing is already very weak now. After a pause, Jiang Xianxia continued, if you don't count Li Tianlan. So, Moraid looked at Jiang Xianxia with fiery eyes, somewhat expectant. So, Jiang Xianxia said blandly, I think it's time for us to take action. Chapter 1002. It was 4 o'clock in the morning in Lioli City. Bang! Gold and iron collided, and sparks flew everywhere. The hard and sharp stiletto collided with the short saber in the style of East Island. The two weapons slid down, and sparks bloomed under the flying snow for a moment. Two figures crossed each other. Cheng Beijiang, whose face was pale, gasped violently. He stood back-to-back with his two opponents and looked around vigilantly. Messy footsteps came from all directions. In the shortest time, 3 elite squads of Jifeng Sword Raining School appeared from different places, stepping on the snowflakes. His vision had become a little blurry. His arm holding the stiletto began to shake uncontrollably. Cheng Beijiang gritted his teeth and suddenly laughed. I can still kill 2 more squads. What do you two say? Ahem. The 2 young teammates beside him laughed at the same time. Then leave the rest of the squads to us. Anyway, Captain, it's worth it tonight. Yeah, it's worth it. Cheng Beijiang, whose eyes were a little dazed, murmured to himself. He looked at the opponents in front of him and directly rushed up. After leaving the small clinic for temporary recuperation, they charged toward the area with the highest fighting intensity. They killed all the way and had rushed through a whole block. The 4 squads of Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School were all killed by Cheng Beijiang's team. The elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace couldn't compare with the Beihai Corps in terms of quality at all. Their so-called elites had only reached the threshold of the lowest 4 realms of martial arts. Most of them were in the chi-controlling realm. Very few of them were in the ice-condensing realm, and those in the fire-flaming realm were already considered high-level figures. But there were so many of them. When almost endless elites came in batches, the gap in the number of people was enough to make up for the gap in the combat effectiveness of the 2 sides. Cheng Beijiang almost killed through a block before he met a real decent opponent. The opponent's strength was not strong. He was in the fire-flaming realm, a little weaker than Cheng Beijiang, but he was held up by the opponent for nearly 5 minutes when he was seriously injured. As the 3 squads slowly surrounded them, Their situation became worse and worse. Without reinforcements, everyone in Qing Beijiang's squad knew very well that this might be the last battle of their lives. There was no hesitation, no fear, no hesitation. The moment the two members behind Qing Beijiang tensed up, Qing Beijiang tightened his grip on the weapon in his hand and rushed towards the opponent standing in front of him. Intense flames instantly ignited in his hands. The raging fire covered his right fist and spread along the blade of the stiletto. It quickly turned into a meter-long saber. The saber burned with the wind and snow as it slashed forward with endless loyalty and love for the army and the North Sea. Qing Beijiang's opponent, who had been staring at him silently, took a step back, his eyes cold and mocking. The next second, an ice wall rose in front of Qing Beijiang. The two squads on his left and right charged forward. The wind howled and the cold frost piled up in front of him, obscuring his vision. Kill! Everything in front of him became more and more blurry. Qing Beijiang roared with all his might as he slashed down with the long sword in his hand. The burning long sword tore through the ice wall with great force. Broken ice and snow danced in the air. Long the saber directly split the nearest ice-freezing mirror elite into two halves. The blade flipped under the night sky and stabbed into the chest of another opponent. Puff! A dull sound accompanied by sharp pain rang out. An extremely narrow short blade stabbed into Qing Beijiang's waist at the same time. Blood spattered. Qing Beijiang, whose face was completely distorted, shook his body. The long flame saber in his hand disappeared, and the sharp stiletto stabbed backward without any hesitation. He turned his body slightly, and the blade of the stiletto stabbed directly into the attacker's abdomen. The moment he turned his body, the fire-flaming realm expert who had just taken a step back suddenly rushed forward. Raging fire and snow flew. Qing Beijiang had no intention of giving up. He pulled out the stiletto with a grim smile, and raging fire began to burst out from all over his body. They would die together. The warriors of North Sea were never afraid of death. Crack! A subtle sound rang out a second before he burst out with all his strength. The next moment, the raging fire on Qing Beijiang's body completely disappeared, leaving only severe pain and numbness. The enemy of the fire-flaming realm in front of him also collapsed to the ground. A shining electric arc exploded between the two of them. The violent current shuttled back and forth between their bodies, directly interrupting Qing Beijiang's last desperate struggle. Qing Beijiang's body fell to the ground, and he tried to keep his eyes open. Vaguely, in a blur, a figure walked up to him, lowered his head, and looked at him in silence. Such a person shouldn't die here. He looked down at Qing Beijiang and said in a flat tone. Qing Beijiang's eyes suddenly widened. His pale face quickly turned red with anger, and his expression looked even more distorted. Because the other party spoke Chinese. His pronunciation was perfect. It was not the perfect pronunciation that foreigners learn Chinese from. It was a natural standard, even with a hint of Yuzhou accent. What did it mean? What did it mean? In extreme anger, Qing Beijiang's voice was trembling. Come with me. The voice continued. Many legions of Zhongzhou state have left North Sea. I can arrange for them to go anywhere they want. A real warrior should serve the country, not become a private lackey. You, Qing Beijiang's voice was ferocious. You colluded with Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace? It's just cooperation. The man's tone was extremely calm. I can give you a chance to live. Leave North Sea and come with me. Come with me, Qing Beijiang sneered. Do you think anyone in North Sea will really go with you? Of course. The thunder-shocking realm expert nodded and said naturally, I saved a lot of people tonight. They are all my colleagues. Heh, Qing Beijiang gasped violently, gritted his teeth, and said, Bullsh *T. He didn't believe that anyone would really go with him. Even if there were such people, there wouldn't be many of them. He grabbed the bayonet, jumped up, and tried his best to stab the man's body. Bang! The thunder-shocking realm expert on the opposite side suddenly raised his leg and kicked Qing Beijiang into the snow again. Blood flowed out of his body and dyed the snow on the ground red. He took 2 steps forward, looked at Qing Beijiang, and said gloomily, Do you want to die? Cheng Beijiang said nothing. You gave up the chance to live. He said slowly, I really hate the so-called Beihai Corps. They act like they're the best in the world. In the past many years, North Sea had Wang Tianzong. He could protect North Sea alone with his sword. Now that Wang Tianzong is gone, what are you? North Sea, North Sea should have died a long time ago. You refused my invitation and want to show your loyalty and backbone? You'd rather die than submit? Then go to hell. I'll fulfill your wish. His voice suddenly paused. Then he fell completely silent. A tiny flame appeared in front of Cheng Beijiang. The flames slowly swam around Cheng Beijiang's body, finally protecting his entire body within it. The thunder-shocking realm expert standing in front of Cheng Beijiang was motionless, as if facing a formidable enemy. The flame burned elegantly and quietly in front of him. But it was not the orange-red that a normal flame should have. Instead, it was an extremely dazzling white. The white flame gently jumped and twisted, completely merging with the snow on the ground. The flame flickered. Every time the white light flickered, it carried a sword intent that was enough to make him tremble with fear. Even compared to the weird white flame of the fire-flaming realm, the sword energy in the flame was the source of his most uneasiness and even the most panic. Who? He suddenly raised his head and said in a low voice. There's one thing wrong. A light and pleasant young female voice rang in the air. It was indifferent, cold, but extremely serious. North Sea has Sword Emperor, but the safety of North Sea has never been guarded by one person and one sword. Snow was flying all over the sky. In the night sky, a slim figure in white clothes and burning with white flames slowly descended from the sky. White snow, white fire, and white clothes. She slowly floated down in the air, as if she had completely merged with the whole world. You're not qualified to comment on North Sea. Her serious and cold voice rang out. The white flame on the ground suddenly jumped for a moment. Extremely sharp sword chi burst out from the flames in an instant. The sword light drowned the thunder and lightning arcs and pierced into the thunder-shocking realm expert's body without any hindrance. A mist of blood suddenly burst out of the snow. The dense sword light flew wantonly. The nearby elite team of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace instantly fell silent. The young woman in the air landed in front of Cheng Beijiang. Cheng Beijiang opened his eyes wide, but he couldn't see anything clearly. In a trance, he seemed to see a young woman, proud and elegant, like a fairy falling into the mortal world. You are... He hesitated for a moment. The young woman looked down at him and took out the medicine she carried with her. Her tone seemed to have some warmth. Sorry, she said softly, we're late. My name is Huangfu Qiushui. Chapter 1003. The cooling medicine entered his mouth and was swallowed into his stomach along with the blood in his mouth. Cheng Beijiang's dazed mind seemed to have been greatly stimulated, and he immediately became much more clear-headed. He didn't hear the girl in front of him introduce herself. However, he was able to see this beautiful face clearly. Huangfu, Cheng Beijiang opened his mouth. Miss Huangfu. Her code name was Peerless Beauty, her surname was Huangfu, and her given name was Qiushui. If the eternal sword above Mormons ended the Sword Emperor era of the Wang family of Beihai and ushered in the current East Emperor era, then in this era, in more than 2 years, Huangfu Qiushui could almost be said to be the first person of the young generation. She was not much younger than Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu. However, the huge gap in status also formed a vague but extremely distinct age gap. Li Tianlan, who was less than 25 years old this year, was fully qualified to be the top expert of the young generation in Zhongzhou State. But the title of the #1 expert of the young generation was almost an insult to him. Next year's ranking on the divine list was where Li Tianlan should be. In the era when the young Donghuang reached the peak, the names of Li Tianlan and Wang Xianxia were no longer on the list of the top 10 experts of the young generation in Zhongzhou State. Huangfu Qiushui ranked first among the top 10 experts of the young generation in Zhongzhou State this year. Huangfu Qiushui of the Sky Academy. With the strength of the peak of the fire-flaming realm, He had killed more than 6 experts at the peak of the Thundershocking realm in more than 2 years since he entered the school and went out on several missions. Everyone had always thought that as long as she successfully entered the Thundershocking realm, her actual combat capability would not be weaker than most superiors of the half-step invincible realm. Among the students from the 2 academies who were in the same batch as her, there were no students who were even qualified to see her back, let alone those who were on par with her. She was truly the best in the world. She was even more dazzling than Li Tianlan was in the 2 academies at that time. Because there was no comparison, everyone would think that Huangfu Qiushui was the champion. Her code name in the Sky Academy was Stunning Beauty. Many people who knew the inside story knew that she was the only student of Summer Solstice. But after more than 2 years in the Sky Academy, everyone was surprised to find that with every progress she made, her martial arts were essentially different from that of the Wang family of Beihai. Especially her sword energy and sword intent, they were almost completely different from those of the Wang family of Beihai. If one had to compare them, the current Huangfuqiu the sword energy and sword intent of water were closer to Li Tianlan's swordsmanship. It was not the swordsmanship of the Li family. It was Li Tianlan's swordsmanship. Therefore, although Li Tianlan had not left the desert prison for a long time, as he fought again and again, the title of His Majesty became more and more stable. At the same time, Huangfu Qiushui, who deliberately approached him with sword qi, gradually began to be called Little Donghuang. She had not entered the Thundershocking realm yet, but her actual combat capability was already at the forefront of Mount Dibing. Cheng Beijiang stared blankly at her figure with a complicated look in his eyes. He knew very well what Huangfu Qiushui's appearance meant. It was impossible for such a young man with limitless potential to appear alone. Huangfu Qiushui's arrival meant that the real high-end combat capability of Beihai had left Mount Dibing and appeared on the battlefield. It also meant that the floating island and Shenzhou behind Liuli City had been cleared. The high-end combat capability of Beihai rushed to Liuli City in the shortest time. Next, it was the most ferocious counterattack. It seemed to be confirming his thoughts. In the snowy night sky, streaks of sword light suddenly appeared one after another. The blue sword light and thunder crisscrossed in the boundless night sky, radiating cold light. The dense sword light danced in the night sky of Liuli City and scattered in different directions. The faint sounds of fighting in different directions in the distance seemed to stop at this moment. Boom! A loud noise suddenly came from the block closest to Cheng Beijiang. The blue sword light flying in the skies suddenly fell to the ground. The endless sword light with surging blue electric arcs spread wildly, almost covering the whole block in the blink of an eye. The surging sword energy spread wildly. More than a dozen elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School around the sword light were torn into pieces of flesh and blood in an instant. The blue electric light swirled and rose on the ground. An old man's figure had rushed out of the electric light and appeared directly behind a visiting professor of the Thundershocking realm of Jifeng Sword Raining School. Crack! The old, skinny but extremely hard arm directly smashed into the opponent's back. The spine was torn under the great force, and the internal organs were completely shattered at the same time. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. The old man, covered in blood, threw away the dead Thundershocking realm expert in his hand and looked down at Jifeng Sword Raining School, which had subconsciously stopped fighting. An elite of the school. Blood rolled down the old man's clothes. He stood high in the sky, looking down with his head down. The old face faced a large number of elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School, with an indescribable fierceness and rudeness. The Wang family of Beihai, punishment is here. Boom! In the deafening noise, the whole block was shaking wildly. The surging and endless lightning occupied everything. Thunder and lightning rolled. Countless elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School were directly smashed by the thunder sea that the old man broke out with all his strength before they even had the thought of escaping. The red light flashed in the sky, and the lightning shuttled back and forth. More and more experts rushed to Liuli City at full speed. The sound of the helicopter whistled across the sky. The fierce battle continued. It was the voice of Beihai. The voice belonging to the Wang family of Beihai rang in every corner of Liuli City. It was earth-shattering, and the fighting intent soared to the sky. Firmament from the Wang family of Beihai is here. Enchantress from the Wang family of Beihai is here. Wasp from the Wang family of Beihai is here. Phoenix from the Wang family of Beihai is here. All heaven's troops from the Wang family of Beihai are here. Who else? Different voices with strong auras resounded throughout the city. In the next second, earth-shattering cheers and roars suddenly rang out. In an instant, the situation in every corner was reversed. In front of Cheng Beijiang, Huangfu Qiushui looked down at the seriously injured middle-aged man and whispered, "Why don't you retreat?" "Retreat?" Cheng Beijiang smiled sadly. "Where can we retreat to? We are the warriors of Beihai and even the trump card. If we retreat from Queen City to Lioli City, where else can we retreat to? Do we retreat all the way to Shenzhou and even seek the protection of Mount Dibing? We are warriors. We have the best treatment in Zhongzhou State and even the world. We are equipped with the most advanced armaments and have the best logistics. We are the guardians of Beihai, not the burden of Mount Dibing. We are warriors. How can we retreat?" Cheng Beijiang whispered. "We can't retreat." Huangfu Qiushui looked down at him for a long time. "You're right," she whispered. "We can't retreat anymore." Cheng Beijiang straightened his body and struggled to get up. He repeated the last order he heard in a low and hoarse voice. "Move forward or die." Chapter 1004. It was 4:15 in the morning. From the beginning of the final battle in Beihai until now, the power of Mount Dibing had officially entered the battlefield. This was not the most critical moment, but it could definitely be said to be the most tragic time. The frenzied killing aura had infected everyone. Smoke filled the air, and blood flowed like a river. Tiny electric arcs surged and flickered in the thick blood. The enchantress stood in the center of the street. With her body as the center, there were charred corpses and wounded people everywhere. The crackling sound of the electric current filled every space around her. She looked at the ruined streets and the large number of corpses around her. Her usually seductive face was almost instantly twisted to the extreme. The Wang family of Beihai, the enchantress. Many people in the dark world knew that the enchantress was born in Lioli City. She grew up in an orphanage in Lioli City. After leaving the orphanage, she lived on the relief fund of Mount Dibing. Beihai never treated her badly, nor did Lioli City. For this land and this city, she had a love and attachment that could not be understood by those who were not involved. This was Beihai, for which she had devoted her whole life and could even sacrifice her life without hesitation. But now it was a mess. Joint forces, East Island, the Dark World, all the enemies. How dare you? Why did you do that? The enchantress's eyes suddenly became scarlet. They rushed through Shenzhou and the floating island. The extremely powerful force easily crushed all the chaos over there. Everyone thought that the result would not be too bad. But after passing the floating island and coming to Lioli City, it was like stepping from the human world into purgatory. You all deserve to die. Bang! The dense electric current suddenly exploded with the enchantress as the center. The electric current spread rapidly in the air, rolling up a large amount of flying snow. Two figures were forced out in the sky full of electric arcs. The enchantress stared at the two figures and said in a hoarse voice, "You deserve to die." The enchantress. In the air, a very tall white European looked a little pale, but his eyes were full of boundless anger and majesty. "Get out of the way now, and I can pretend that nothing happened. If you deserve to die." The enchantress repeated. She was very familiar with the white man in front of her. He was also an old opponent whom she had fought before. He was one of the Grand Knights of Knights Templars, an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, code-named Holy Sword. The companion beside him should be a visiting professor of Jifeng Sword Raining School, a thunder-shocking realm expert. Of course, the two of them were not afraid of the enchantress. However, with the entrance of the high-end combat force of Mount Dibing, they obviously did not want to stay here. They intended to temporarily withdraw from Lioli City, return to Kanglan Province, and then fight with Mount Dibing. As for the key to the outcome of the battle, it was not here. The high-end combat power of Mount Dibbing could appear here, which meant that the elites of the joint forces had completed their tasks. The guards of Mount Dibbing must be empty at this time. When the invincible realm experts of the joint forces took down Mount Dibbing, all the people of the joint forces would attack the remaining forces of Beihai with several invincible realm experts from the north and south. Then, it was time to reap the fruits of victory. Holy Sword looked at the time and snorted coldly. He ignored Yao Ji and said in a deep voice, "Let's go." He didn't even have time to move. The enchantress had already appeared in front of him. A scream that almost tore his eardrums suddenly sounded in his ears, with hysterical killing intent and madness. "You deserve to die." The phantom shuttled back and forth. In the place where Yao Ji originally stood, countless thunderbolts suddenly weaved into a huge and dazzling blue halo of sword energy. The moment the halo was formed, she had already appeared in front of Holy Sword. The air was violently shaking and twisting. Yao Ji stretched out her palm, and a shining whip of thunder and lightning appeared in her hand. Without any hesitation, Yao Ji clenched the long whip and threw it at Holy Sword. The enraged Holy Sword suddenly roared and punched the enchantress's head. The distance between the two sides was quickly shortened. The thunder whip constantly shrank on Holy Sword's huge and burly body. Bang! The long whip shrank to the extreme, and a large number of electric arcs suddenly exploded. At that moment, the space distorted in a shape visible to the naked eye. The space and electric arcs that were completely out of control continued to collapse toward Holy Sword, tearing his body. His fists were still waving forward, but his body was directly imprisoned in place at the moment when the long whip exploded. An incomparably violent blue thunderbolt blasted out from his fist. At the same time, the guest of Jifeng's sword training school, who had been advancing and retreating with him, was like a ghost. He glided quickly under the night sky and stabbed at Yao Ji's heart with his sword. Thunderbolts and sword light, one in front and one behind, completely blocked Yao Ji's path of action. Yao Ji's body rotated gently. In an instant, her figure disappeared from their line of sight without any warning. Holy Sword was suddenly shocked. Dazzling thunderbolts instantly burst out from another direction. That was where Yao Ji had been standing before she rushed to them. At this moment, the halo of sword energy she left in place kept flashing. Yao Ji instantly appeared where the halo was as if she had teleported, and her eyes grew colder and colder. This is, Holy Sword's pupils shrank slightly. He had fought with the enchantress several times on different occasions, so they knew each other very well. As an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, the enchantress's rapid phantom shuttle could be said to be her signature unique skill, and the void chain entangled him. He was no stranger to her, but at this moment, the enchantress gave him an extremely unfamiliar feeling. He couldn't understand Yao Ji's way of retreat. In the previous many fights, Yao Ji didn't have this kind of means. Half-step invincible realm, Holy Sword murmured to himself. Before he could finish his sentence, the enchantress disappeared from his sight once again. Watch out! Holy Sword's face suddenly changed. Facing a peak of the thunder-shocking realm and facing a half-step invincible realm, although it sounded like there was only half a realm difference, in fact, the gap could almost be said to be huge. In the same way, Phantom Shuttle. Yao Ji appeared in front of Holy Sword in an instant. A halo of sword energy that looked a little weak quickly formed under her feet. Space vibrated. The moment the essence, chi, and spirit were completely condensed, a spear made of pure thunderbolts appeared in Holy Sword's hand. He held the spear and directly stabbed forward without any hesitation. The halo of sword energy shone in front of Holy Sword. Yao Ji's figure disappeared again. She made two phantom shuttles almost without any interval. The enchantress, who was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, didn't have enough physical strength to make two consecutive shuttles without stopping. There was no doubt that the current enchantress was a real half-step invincible realm. Behind you! The sword light was dazzling. The guest of Jifeng's sword training school suddenly drew his sword. However, it wasn't a forward thrust, but a horizontal sweep. The sword chi was like a gale. the violent sword qi suddenly split the space behind the holy sword. In the blink of an eye, a wall made of pure sword energy appeared behind the holy sword. The enchantress also appeared at the same time as the gale wall. She opened her arms, and with a burst of power, waves after waves of lightning rushed towards the holy sword. However, all the lightning was blocked by the gale wall behind the holy sword. The guest chamberlain of Jifeng's sword training school charged forward with his sword in hand. Sword light flashed, and with many afterimages, he directly stabbed at the back of the holy sword. The enchantress's figure flickered for a moment and suddenly disappeared. She reappeared where the halo of sword will was, in front of the holy sword. Her figure passed by the guest elder of the Jifeng sword training school. The long whip once again appeared in Yao Ji's hand and coiled around the holy sword. Explode. Confine. In a very short time of confine, all the power in Yao Ji's body burst out in a vigorous way without reservation. The endless thunderbolts directly swallowed the Grand Knight of Knights Templars. Yao Ji's hysterical voice rang out again. "You're all going to die." Chapter 1005. The battlefield was quickly divided into countless pieces. The goal of many experts on Mount Dibbing was extremely clear. They didn't deliberately deal with the elites of the two East Island superpowers who caused great trouble to Beihai. Everyone's target was the experts of the joint forces. A large number of ordinary elites were used as cannon fodder to delay North Sea's main forces, while the experts of the Allied forces lurked in the shadows to make North Sea bleed continuously. This was the Allied forces' strategy. This strategy was indeed successful. They had indeed brought great trouble to North Sea, and even caused unprecedented losses and failures. But with the intervention of Mount Dibbing, the whole situation was almost completely reversed in an instant. Every thundershocking realm expert in Mount Dibbing had his own area to be responsible for. The thundershocking realm expert in the air was looking for the elites of the joint forces. All heaven's troops and internal defense troops on the ground were invincible. The whole situation was completely reversed in the most extreme speed and way, and the experts of the joint forces were constantly falling. Thunder and sword qi filled the sky of Lioli City. At this moment, dozens of thundershocking realm experts from the joint forces and the Wang family of Beihai were unleashing their powers. More than half of the city was completely illuminated by the seemingly endless lightning. Only the center of the city was silent amidst the boundless lightning. This was where the city hall was located. The moment the final battle broke out, this area was the first to fall. The Allied forces and the cannon fodder forces of East Island occupied the largest office building here and formed a temporary headquarters. It could be said that this was the place where the Allied forces were the strongest in Lioli City. There were two half-step invincible realm experts from Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace, and one half-step invincible realm expert from the Jiang family of South America. There were three at the peak of the thundershocking realm, 3 thundershocking realm experts, and more than 50 fire-flaming realm experts. Without the intervention of the high-level combat power of Mount Dibbing, this force could easily establish the situation of Lioli City at the most critical moment, and then rush directly to the floating island and Shenzhou with a large number of cannon fodder. This was the vanguard force that the Allied forces had invested in the entire North Sea battle. When the cannon fodder had been lost to a certain extent, they would directly take action and use the most decisive and cruel method to completely shatter the North Sea's will to resist. 3 in the half-step invincible realm, 3 in the peak of the thundershocking realm, and 3 in the thundershocking realm. As the true vanguard, these 9 high-ranking officials gathered in Lioli City could be said to be the cream of the crop among their peers, be it in terms of strength or physical condition. They had led the Allied forces across the Kanglan River, and could now be said to be the toughest bone to chew in the northern North Sea. So naturally, when the high-end combat power of Beihai entered the arena, what they were waiting for was the first position of the Wang family of Beihai on the surface. An expert. Killing, thunder, raging fire, flying snow. Dazzling lights and shadows flashed in all directions in the distance. The tall woman walked on the street without any expression. She didn't have any aura of a master, nor did she have any killing intent. She just walked forward quietly, but the elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace who stood in her way fell down one after another. They were not elites who had just joined the two forces. They were the real elites of the two superpowers in East Island. The wind and snow danced wildly in the block near the city hall. The wind and snow became bigger and bigger as the woman walked forward. From the beginning to the end, she didn't seem to make a move, but the elites in front of her kept falling down. When the first batch of elites who rushed to less than 10 meters in front of her suddenly fell to the ground, no one found anything wrong at all. The elites who had made up their minds to wash Beihai with blood rushed forward one after another, and then fell to the ground one after another. In just over 10 seconds, more than 100 elites had fallen in front of the woman. Everyone began to step back. But as the woman walked forward, more and more people fell down. No one had any wounds on their bodies, but the moment their bodies fell, they no longer had any vitality. An overwhelming snowstorm blanketed the entire street like a madman. The falling snow between heaven and earth seemed to start rotating slowly with the woman as the center. The snowflakes fell on the ground and floated in the air. When most of the city was covered by thunder and lightning, the sky and earth in the downtown area showed an extremely cold white. Who is this? In the temporary headquarters on the top floor of the office building, a dark-skinned, short man stood in front of the window and looked at the woman downstairs with solemn and serious eyes. The huge floor-to-ceiling window was almost completely covered by the wind and snow. Layers of white frost appeared on the window, and the figure of the woman also seemed extremely vague. "I'm no match for her." Without any hesitation, the short, dark-skinned man told the truth frankly. It sounded shameful, but no one present would think he was a coward. The Jiang family of South America, which had a longer history than the Wang family of Beihai, had never had a coward among their conquerors. Janamalas the Conqueror. The leader of the conqueror troop of the Jiang family of South America, a top superior of the half-step invincible realm. Under the most frightening executioner sequence of the Jiang family of South America, the conqueror, the destroyer, and the slaughterer could be said to be the most important forces of the Jiang family of South America in the Dark World. Jiang Guochu was generous, wasn't he? Janamalas, the conqueror, put him here. It could be said that he spent a lot of money and was full of sincerity. Her code name is Phoenix, and her real name is Xia Huang. It is said that she is the younger sister of Summer Solstice. Next to Janamalas, the deputy palace master of Wuji Palace, who was also in the half-step invincible realm, Saber Ghost, looked a little pale. It hasn't been long since she returned to Beihai, and she hasn't made many moves. We can't find more information about her. In the past many years, she doesn't seem to exist in the Dark World. The only possibility is that she exists in the Dark World in a different identity. All kinds of signs show that she seems to be the current top expert in Beihai, but no one can be sure of this. Can't you be sure now? Next to them, a woman with an extremely crazy and fierce aura pointed at the scene below. Doesn't this explain the problem? The woman took 2 steps forward, and the extremely fierce aura almost pierced the huge floor-to-ceiling window in front of her. Compared with Saber Ghost, the deputy palace master who ranked last in Wuji Palace, her status was obviously higher. In terms of real strength, her strength was even slightly better than that of Janamalas. She was now the only deputy sect master of Jifeng Sword Raining School. Her code name was Sword Soul, and she was only a step away from the real invincible realm. Did you see that just now? Sword Soul looked at the scene downstairs and asked in a low voice. Janamalas and Saber Ghost raised their eyebrows at the same time. I saw the fire, Sword Soul said in a low voice, but it disappeared very soon. With her voice, there was another burst of fire in the team of Jifeng Sword Raining School downstairs. The fire rolled up the wind and snow. It burned in an instant and then went out in an instant, as if it had never existed. The pupils of Janamalas and Saber Ghost suddenly contracted for a moment. This detail was not terrible. What was terrible was the other meaning that this detail represented. From a scientific point of view, Sword Soul's voice was flat and cold. Flames can't burn in a space without oxygen, At this time, downstairs, beside that woman, there should be a space that is infinitely close to a vacuum. So, before he finished speaking, Saber Ghost had already gasped. Domain? Only the domain of the invincible realm could really form a space that was infinitely close to a vacuum. There was no one who did not know about this matter. Sword Soul nodded and said gloomily, "There's no need to discuss whether she is the current #1 expert in Beihai, but she must be a real invincible realm expert. And a very special invincible realm expert." Chapter 1006. Special Invincible Realm. This sentence was not difficult to understand in the Dark World, and it was even easier for the 3 half-step invincible realm experts of the joint forces. Before Phoenix, the king of shadow in the Dark World, Siduwanjia, who made the sanctuary suffer the heaviest loss in nearly 100 years, was a special invincible realm expert. He regarded the so-called 4 realms of martial arts as nothing. Experts who broke through to the invincible realm from a single realm were all special. Strictly speaking, the combat capability of such people might not be absolutely strong, but their exploration and excavation of a certain realm were constantly beyond the limit. Their knowledge and understanding of their own realm even surpassed that of experts at the peak of the invincible realm. Therefore, such people could often burst out incredible destructive power in a battle. The sky was full of wind and snow, and it was a world of ice and snow. White frost fluttered in the city center, filling up the sky and wreaking havoc in the city. Everywhere was covered in a cold, silvery white color. The elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace kept retreating, and the formation was scattered. Finally, it turned into a large-scale escape. As Phoenix moved forward, more and more people fell down, and more people ran away. Obviously, this was a special person who broke through to the invincible realm from the ice-condensing realm. No. Janamalas frowned. She can't be regarded as a real invincible realm expert. Janamalas affirmed his speculation in a very certain tone. Instead of relaxing, his tone became more and more serious. She can be said to have the combat capability of the invincible realm. The key is the current temperature and environment. This environment can be said to be the home field of all ice-condensing realm experts. Now, even a real invincible realm expert may not be her opponent. Retreat? Without any hesitation, Saber Ghost said. "Can we leave?" Sword Soul's voice was extremely gloomy. "We can leave, but what about the people below? What about the people outside? Give the order. All retreat, get out of Lioli City, back to the Queen City, and even back to Kanglan City." Janamalas said slowly, "We must be clear that our people in Lioli City are no match for the high-end combat capability of Mount Dibbing at all. We are just the vanguard. Our goal is to attract the high-end combat capability of Mount Dibbing to enter, weaken the guard power of Mount Dibbing, and cause the greatest damage to Beihai before they appear. At present, I think we have done a very good job. But our target is not Lioli City." The Sword Soul said coldly. "North Sea has gone mad. They stopped us here at all costs, and they've also suffered great losses. We didn't enter the battlefield we expected, but we've caused more damage to the enemy than we expected. Isn't that enough?" Janamalas laughed. "We should retreat. What else can we do? Fighting North Sea to the death with just the few of us here is equivalent to throwing our lives away. Remember who you are. We are just the vanguard. Some masters of the joint forces will follow His Majesty and the Royal Highnesses to set foot on Mount Dibbing, but these people are few. Most of them will stay in Kanglan to stabilize the situation there. We have a great advantage in Kanglan. Temporarily retreat to Kanglan, concentrate our forces, and eliminate all the high-end combat forces in North Sea. This is one of the most crucial plans in the final battle." Janamalas clenched his fists and shook his head. "In the final battle of North Sea, the most important thing is not only Mount Dibbing, but also in Kanglan. We will concentrate our forces to kill all the high-end combat forces in North Sea, and then directly fight from Kanglan to Mount Dibbing to join the Royal Highnesses, making the Wang family of Beihai completely history." He looked at the sword soul and said word by word, "In order to achieve this goal, some insignificant sacrifices are completely acceptable." Insignificant sacrifices? The sword soul stared at the conqueror of the Jiang family of South America with red eyes. Her palm pointed out of the window. This is an insignificant sacrifice. They knew very well how many people there were in the so-called vanguard, and they also knew how many of their people were in Liuli City at this time. In the face of the entrance of the high-end combat force of North Sea, if they ordered a retreat at this time, in such a situation, in a panic and without a command, it would be good if only 1/10 of these people could return to Kanglan City. This kind of sacrifice was hard to bear for Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, and for the entire East Island. They are indeed great, Saber Ghost said blandly, but compared to the goal we have been pursuing for hundreds of years, they are insignificant. Not only them, as long as we can achieve the goal, we, even the two highnesses, including Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace. Everyone is insignificant. We will remember them. If we can't leave here tonight, someone will remember us. The sword soul gritted her teeth and kept taking deep breaths. She seemed to want to say something, but in the end, she said nothing. In this final battle of North Sea, it was Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, but it was not only them. In the few months before the final battle broke out, the strength of the two martial arts forces in East Island could be said to have skyrocketed. In just a few months, their comprehensive strength, including combatants, weapons and equipment, and economic power, suddenly increased by dozens of times. This kind of investment meant that they couldn't afford to lose, and it meant that the forces behind them couldn't afford to lose either. The more than 70,000 square kilometers of fertile land in the south of North Sea was the obsession that took root in the hearts of all of them for hundreds of years. This kind of obsession was passed down from generation to generation. Now that there was a chance, they had to seize it. They could lose, they could sacrifice, and they could even give up everything. But they just couldn't lose. Because they really couldn't afford to lose. If this final battle of North Sea ended with their failure, it could be said to be an unprecedented disaster for Jifeng Sword Raining School, for Wuji Palace, and for the entire East Island. This was not even a problem of shaking the foundation. If they didn't see the result they wanted in this big gamble, it would be a problem whether they could linger on in the future. Let's go. Janamalas narrowed his eyes and looked at the wind and snow outside the window. The wind and snow were howling. At the same time he made up his mind, Phoenix below raised her head and glanced at the conqueror at the same time. Through the night, through the wind and snow, they were dozens of meters apart. Crack! In the extremely clear cracking sound, all the windows of the municipal building, which was more than 10 stories high, suddenly shattered. The cold wind and snow instantly blew into the building. All the warmth completely disappeared. In the temporary command room, the temperature dropped by dozens of degrees the moment the windows were broken. Bang! All the teacups, bottles, cans, and kettles in the command room froze at the same time and then exploded. The temperature kept dropping, and endless icy wind blew in. The conqueror of the Jiang family of South America, the deputy palace master of Wuji Palace, the deputy suzerain of Jifeng Sword Raining School. There were also 6 other superiors of the thunder-shocking realm. Everyone trembled slightly in the cold wind. Not because of fear or scruples. Just because of the cold. It was an almost instinctive physiological reaction. Phoenix stepped in the air, and her body was getting higher and higher. There seemed to be an invisible staircase in the air, dragging her up constantly. The wind and snow were dancing wildly in the sky. Every snowflake seemed to become an extremely sharp sword. The fluttering snowflakes fell in her domain and flew out with her power. Phoenix's domain was getting bigger and bigger, squeezing the sky above Liuli City. Thunder was still roaring and spreading in all directions, but no electric arc could get close to the wind and snow in the air. It was winter in North Sea. The lowest temperature in the early morning. Everyone was facing the wind and snow that had been roaring and raging in North Sea for several days. What was the home advantage? To Phoenix, all of this was a true home ground advantage. She was not the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Strictly speaking, she was in the ice-condensing realm, which was infinitely close to the invincible realm. All the combat capability she possessed was constantly breaking the limit in the domain of the ice-condensing realm. So this home advantage allowed her to break through her bottleneck easily and temporarily in this environment. At this moment, in this wind and snow, it could be said that Phoenix was at the peak of her life. Endless snowflakes gathered crazily around her and neatly arranged themselves. Phoenix's figure was getting higher and higher, gradually approaching the command room in the building. The snowflakes all over the sky surrounded her, forming a vast white disk. In the command room, 9 superiors of the thundershocking realm and above had gathered together. Countless blue electric arcs flashed around them. Everyone gathered together and slowly retreated. Slowly retreated. The boundless cold wind and snow seemed to freeze everything, and even their movements became extremely difficult. Phoenix's tall figure came up from the ground. Through the broken window, she was level with the 9 superiors in the command room. The boundless snow disk almost completely swallowed her figure. Vaguely, Janamalas the Conqueror saw Phoenix open her hands. He opened his mouth to say something, but the rapidly dropping temperature and the cold wind poured directly into his throat the moment he opened his mouth. His face turned red, and he trembled and coughed wildly. Boom! The moment the first cough sounded, Phoenix's hands were completely open, embracing the night, embracing the wind and snow, destroying heaven and earth. The densely packed disc-shaped snowflakes around her suddenly exploded. The once bustling city seemed to usher in a huge avalanche without warning. The wind and snow were as sharp as knives. The flying snow seemed to have become a part of Phoenix's body. They flew everywhere, tearing everything around them. Streets, people, buildings, trees, gardens, street lamps. The wind and snow were mighty. The violent sound was earth-shattering. It seemed that the whole world was collapsing. The temperature dropped crazily. The flying wind and snow froze everything. This was Phoenix's strongest blow using the home advantage. She directly blew up her domain. Exploring the power of the invincible realm with the ice-condensing realm, her domain had the most distinctive feature of the ice-condensing realm. That was absolute coldness. The temperature dropped crazily, and in the shortest time, it reached a horrifying low temperature of nearly 100 degrees below zero. Under the snow explosion, all the elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace were completely buried by the collapsed snowflakes and buildings. Under such conditions, almost no so-called elites could survive. The snowflakes gradually fell to the ground. The extreme coldness was still spreading silently in the ruins. Phoenix stood in the air, slightly lowered her head, and narrowed her eyes. In her sight, the blue electric arcs collapsed countless snow and large pieces of ice, and one figure after another appeared in front of her. It was still the 9 superiors with high-level combat capability. With the 3 superiors of the half-step invincible realm as the core, everyone joined hands to block Phoenix's outbreak. In addition to Phoenix, in the nearby large area, these 9 superiors were the last survivors of the snow explosion. Phoenix's face was indifferent, without sadness or joy. She had never liked Beihai, so she was not moved by the so-called miserable situation in front of her. She came to Beihai only because of her sister's request, that was all. The enemy in front of her was not dead, so she could kill him again. Even if she couldn't kill him, it didn't matter. Just try your best. Endless snow and wind surged toward her body again. Phoenix's eyes seemed to turn into snow, pure white, extremely pure and focused. "Bitch, how dare you!" A seemingly mad shout suddenly came from below. A thundershocking realm expert of Jifeng Sword Raining School was so angry that he was about to rush out and fight with Phoenix. The snow explosion caused by Phoenix just now buried all the elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, including all his direct subordinates. Under the attack of extreme anger, he seemed to have completely lost his mind. A dazzling thunderbolt suddenly bloomed in his hand, and then went out in an instant. It was a world of ice and snow, endless coldness. Phoenix glanced at him. In the dull sound, the bodies of the 3 thundershocking realm experts who had not yet reached the peak of the thundershocking realm suddenly exploded, but there was no splashing blood. All the blood in the three people's bodies was completely frozen into ice cubes, and the broken bodies completely became frozen meat, falling to the ground piece by piece. Retreat! Retreat now! The three superiors of the half-step invincible realm felt their scalps go numb. They didn't know enough about Phoenix, but under such unique conditions, the extreme strength that Phoenix exerted was not at the invincible realm, but close to the peak of the invincible realm. This kind of special superior who only pursued a single realm, once he grew up, was enough to make anyone feel tricky. The three superiors of the half-step invincible realm and the three superiors of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm turned around at the same time. Expressionless, Phoenix crooked her finger at them. The wind and snow between heaven and earth froze in an instant. The bodies of the three superiors of the half-step invincible realm suddenly stiffened for a moment, and they almost fell into the snow. Blood gushed out of their mouths, and instantly froze into ice. Their speed of escape suddenly slowed down countless times. The bodies of the three superiors at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm behind them were completely frozen where they were. As Phoenix moved her finger, all the blood in their bodies rushed out of their eyes, nostrils, ears, and mouths. The blood left their bodies and froze instantly, falling to the ground. All the blood in the three superiors at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was sucked out in an instant, and their bodies completely shriveled at a speed visible to the naked eye. Phoenix's figure slowly floated forward in the wind and snow for a while. She finally opened her mouth and said the first words since she stepped into the battlefield. "You can't run away." Facing the three superiors of the half-step invincible realm, she slowly moved her palm forward. The wind and snow in all directions were like dragons, roaring and rising into the sky, filling the night sky. Phoenix's palm slowly pressed forward. But nothing happened. The roar of the helicopter came from far away in the sky. From south to north, it flew over the sky of Lioli City. Countless wind and snow froze in the air in an instant. An extremely obscure domain directly shrouded from the inside of the helicopter, instantly controlling the wind and snow in Phoenix's hand. Endless heavy snow swirled, squeezed together, and directly smashed toward Phoenix. Phoenix's expression changed slightly. Before her body could react, the endless snowflakes had already slammed into her body. Bang! In the dull sound, Phoenix's body was directly slapped away for dozens of meters, and a large amount of blood flowed down from all over her body. This power, Conqueror, Saber Ghost, and Sword Soul were ecstatic. They subconsciously bowed in the direction of the helicopter and said loudly, "Thank you, Your Majesty." The helicopter did not stop at all, and did not even care about Phoenix's life or death. It flew over Lioli City at full speed. On the helicopter, several superiors of the invincible realm and more than a dozen superiors of the half-step invincible realm were silent all the way. When the high-end combat capability of Mount Dibbing entered the battlefield to fight back against Kanglin's sect, the strongest combat capability of the joint forces also left Kanglin's sect. They went straight to Mount Dibbing. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.